Orangutans have very slow metabolisms. Their MO is to conserve energy, so being really crazy and wild and having these facial expressions is not their thing. When they're calm and relaxed, that means they're happy. I think Ronnie was the most interested. When they've got this tiny little lift of the edges of their mouth, that's a smile. And he was spending a lot of time sitting there smiling and enjoying his drink and really listening and paying attention. It was really fun to watch them and how much they enjoyed it. They were very happy. It made me very happy to see how happy they were.
The Independent Audit Committee was established by charter and receives audit reports and other information from the Denver Audit Office. The committee strives to bring greater clarity, transparency, and accountability to Denver's city government and its residents. It is also responsible for commissioning an annual audit of the city's annual comprehensive financial report. This committee is chaired by Auditor Timothy M. O'Brien.
Let's call the February 16th meeting of the Independent Audit Committee to order. And it would be appropriate to take the roll. Edie?
Jack Blumenthal.
Here.
Lorraine Knapp.
Here.
Leslie Mitchell.
Here.
Rudy Payan.
Here.
Edward Schultz.
Here.
Tim O'Brien.
Here. All right, we have a quorum. Next item is approval of the January 19th, 2023 minutes. The minutes are in order.
I move that we accept the the minutes.
Second.
All right, thank you. Any discussion, comments, edits? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Great. Next item is the report briefing on safety and security of city facilities follow-up. Karis, would you like to introduce yourself and your audit team?
Yes, I will. Good morning, auditor and committee members. My name is Karis Epstein, and I was the manager for the safety and security of city facilities follow-up report that we're presenting this morning. I am joined at the table today by Sean Wysong, audit manager, and John Michael Steiner, senior auditor. While the original audit was published in June of 2020, the city's response to the pandemic and presence in the Emergency Operations Center in both 2020 and 21 greatly impacted their ability to respond to our recommendations. So we delayed it until August of 2022. Department managers have also communicated that they are still working to finish implementing the remaining recommendations. We would like to thank staff in the Mayor's Office, Department of Finance, General Services, Office of Emergency Management, Department of Public Safety, and the Fire Department for their assistance throughout our follow-up effort. And members from the Mayor's Office, Emergency Management, and Public Safety were unable to make it today due to responsibilities in the Operations Center, and we thank them for their continued dedication to the migrant sheltering response.
Great. We have a few people here from Public Safety, General Services, and the Department of Finance. Would you like to introduce yourselves before we get started?
Sure.
And forgive me for interrupting. And if you have any opening remarks, this would be a good time to do that.
Thank you. Good morning. Cami Jolie with the Department of General Services. I'm the Director of Administration, and thank you for all of the time and effort that was put into this audit. It was quite extensive across many agencies, so we appreciate the time and effort that was devoted to it.
Corey DeBar, Division Chief of Fire Prevention for the Denver Fire Department, and Union County Denver's Fire Marshal. I want to echo some of those sentiments, and at the same time, understanding that a lot of what we do, we have checks and balances, and I guess, for lack of a better term, the nice thing about a process like this is to show us where we can make improvements, because we don't always have formalized process for that, so thank you.
And Deborah McMillan with the Department of Finance. I'm the Director of Risk Management and Workers' Compensation, and also, their comments I share, and I just, appreciate Karis and her team and understanding, it was kind of unprecedented times, trying to oversee emergency preparedness training when we're in a hybrid environment and the turnover, and so it was good to be able to just kind of bounce some of our ideas and things that we were doing off of her as well. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Shall we
We shall.
at the beginning?
The responsibility for safety and security of city facilities is decentralized and spread across multiple city agencies, including General Services, Department of Finance's Risk Management Office, Department of Public Safety, and the Office of Emergency Management and Homeland Security. At the time of our audit, the city also had a contract with HSS Incorporated to provide security services at city facilities. The contract with HSS was in place since 2005 and required them to provide security at key city administration buildings, public works facilities, Denver Human Services, Denver Motor Vehicles locations, and for wastewater management. It's worth noting that the city has a new facility contract as of January 2022 with Securitas. As part of our review of safety and security initiatives, we looked at 3 executive orders. Executive Order 6 related to facility security and identification cards, which had last been updated in 2003. We also reviewed Executive Order 65, last revised in 2008, which established citywide responsibility for creating safety standards. And finally, we looked at Executive Order 85, which defined the responsibilities of the Office of Emergency Management and established the city's policy for disaster prevention and response. This order had last been updated in 2011. Okay. Our original audit contained 3 objectives. The first was to determine if the city had clearly defined roles and responsibilities for safety and security. The second was to examine the effectiveness of city practices to ensure the safety and security of facilities, employees, and the public. And finally, the third was to analyze if HSS was providing safety and security services in compliance with the contract and in alignment with leading practices. The audit examined physical safety and security as well as security services provided at city facilities to determine whether the safety of city employees and visitors was adequately addressed. We reviewed documentation and data to support practices and internal controls from January 1st, 2018 through October 31st, 2019. We also reviewed some city initiatives that had been in place since 2003. In our original audit report issued in June 2020, we had 3 overall findings. First, the city had not sufficiently prioritized the safety and security of city facilities. Second, we found existing safety and security initiatives for city facilities were inadequate. And lastly, we found the city was not always receiving security services in alignment with the contract or leading security practices. We proposed 23 recommendations in June 2020. Of those, the city fully implemented 9, partially implemented 7, and has yet to implement the remaining 7. And before we present the recommendations associated with finding 1, I'd like to pause for questions and comments from the committee or the agencies.
Questions? No? Should we continue?
As shown on page 1 of the follow-up report, finding 1 was the city and county of Denver has not sufficiently prioritized the safety and security of city facilities. As stated on page 1, recommendation 1.1 to develop a strategic plan was fully implemented. The mayor's office created the Interagency Facility Safety and Security Plan, which details approaches, goals, and metrics for all agencies involved in citywide facility safety and security. Recommendation 1.2 on page 2 of the report to define roles and responsibilities was also implemented. The interagency plan says all agencies have a responsibility to ensure facility safety and security and lists some specific roles for certain agencies such as general services and emergency management. Aside from the goals and metrics, the facility safety and security plan also has timelines for achieving goals, lists approaches to monitoring and addressing challenges. The plan says this process is overseen by the Denver Security Office and calls for both an annual informal review and formal review every 5 years. The plan also allows members involved in safety and security in the city to have a clear understanding of objectives and goals, timelines, and responsibilities. I'll now pause for any questions or comments on the implemented recommendations for finding 1.
Questions from the committee?
All right, as shown on page 2 of the follow-up report, recommendation 1.3 to update executive orders was partially implemented. The Office of Emergency Management revised Executive Order 85 in September 2020 to include an increased emphasis on citywide plans, such as the Emergency Operations Plan, and removed a section on reporting requirements to the federal government that was no longer relevant. Additionally, the Department of Finance drafted changes to Executive Order 65, which were reviewed and approved by the city's Executive Order Committee in November 2022, and were in the process of being reviewed by the city executive directors. The proposed changes relate to authority and new training requirements for city employees. However, the city has yet to make proposed revisions to Executive Order 6 related to badging systems and identification. Until revised, Executive Order 6 remains outdated and does not include all city agencies in its list of departments with unique badge and credential requirements. It also does not define roles and responsibilities for access, identity, and credential management, and until these changes are made, the city's many systems are still not integrated. I'll now pause for questions or comments on finding 1.
Questions, comments? Any response from public safety, finance, general services? Is anything in the works as far as Executive Order 6 goes?
Yes, absolutely. So the Facility Safety and Security Committee, this is one of their, we have 7 different focus areas, and access control is one of those. So as Karis had mentioned at the beginning of this, that the city has a very decentralized safety and security program. So the intent of that committee is to bring together all of the agencies that manage security for their facilities. And so the committee has come together, and the conversations are around how do we then update the executive order to actually reflect our operations in the city, because we have that decentralized system. And so the big part of access control is understanding what we have as a city and then defining the policies and the processes and procedures that are going to actually govern those systems. And so that's what the committee is working on now. We've split off into different work groups to focus on some of those areas, and access control is a big one. So yes, there is work in progress.
Thank you, Rudy.
Absolutely.
Have you guys had an exercise in terms of implementing the, just an exercise in terms of safety and security, in terms of reenacting a scenario where something might have gone awry at this point?
So exercise is a very specific term whenever you're thinking about safety and
Citywide
security.
exercise in terms of safety and security, in terms of there's a major crisis that occurs outside, let's say a terrorist attack.
Sure.
You guys
So
done
not
any-
necessarily an exercise. Again, that's a very specific term. And so we have provided significant training, which is now required through the Executive Order 65 that Deveron can maybe speak about a little bit more. But training really is the first step in that. I would
understand.
say from an exercise perspective, not necessarily an exercise, but a drill, whenever you think about our evacuation drills that we do manage in our buildings, and that is an annual process. I believe that is required by fire code.
I was more or less looking for an overall drill or exercise for the city, but That's fine.
Did you want
Citywide.
to comment?
We have not done that just because of the significant impacts on our operations. We do, there may be some, like the airport always does one, but as far as like the downtown core,
Yes.
and that's why our focus has been on training of employees. And so one of the changes, as mentioned to XO 65, is that we have required trainings, but they were required in new hire orientation, and we were pushing them out as required, but it didn't state in our executive order that they were required. And so that's one of the changes. We've also added information for all new employees. As soon as you start, you get this training. So that's a big focus of ours, along with the annual fire drills that we do, but just making sure employees are constantly getting that training and those reminders.
But a citywide exercise has not been conducted this fall.
And it's not planned at this point.
Is there one plan in the future? Just
Not at different, for different facilities or locations, but not a citywide exercise.
thank you very much. You answered my question.
We have, however, done run, hide, and fight, and a number of other trainings that, from the perspective of active shooter and a few others that have been implemented.
Okay.
In certain, in locations.
Exactly.
And they're kind of building-specific or agency-specific.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Is there a point in time that you think Executive Order 6 will be updated?
Yes. I believe it's defined in our plan. I'd have to look back at the specific date there. But I think we should have a draft within the next 6 months. And of course, that has to go to the committee for review and approval at that point.
Okay, thank you. It's not a small task.
It is not, and we have 16 different agencies that participate in the Facility Safety and Security Committee, and so it's getting all of the buy-in from that committee as well.
Thank you. Karis?
Like there are roughly 180 buildings, and we were talking about those structures that are broken down. Everything will be different, and response by the people that work in those buildings will also be different. So it's very hard to nail that all down at one time and have one specific style of training because it doesn't work for every structure.
Right.
Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Sean to present finding 2.
Thank you, Karis. So on page 4 of the follow-up report, finding 2 says existing safety and security initiatives for city facilities are not adequate. We provided 17 recommendations for finding 2. The city fully implemented 6, partially implemented 4, and did not implement 7. As stated on page 4 of the report, recommendation 2.3 to amend Executive Order 65 was fully implemented. The Risk Management Office has proposed changes to the Executive Order that have been approved by the Executive Order Committee that include a list of safety standards in the memorandum to the order and a requirement that risk management policies and procedures should be posted online. Page 5 of the follow-up report says that recommendation 2.4 to document roles and responsibilities for emergency response team is fully implemented. The city formed the Facility Safety and Security Committee, chaired by the Denver Security Office, which is charged with implementing the city's interagency facility safety and security plan that was finalized in 2021. The Risk Management and Workers' Compensation Division was given the responsibility to develop and implement the city's emergency response and evacuation program, as well as building emergency procedures guides. Pages 5 and 6 also show that recommendation 2.5 to implement policies and procedures for emergency response team was also fully implemented. The Risk Management and Workers' Compensation Division developed a policy and procedure for emergency response team training and emergency evacuation drills that includes tracking emergency coordinators and verifying training attendance. The policy and procedures are applicable to city employees in leased locations as well. And as stated on page 6 of the follow-up report, recommendation 2.6 to implement a certification program was fully implemented. The Denver Fire Department developed a training for facility safety administrators, which is conducted by the department and the Risk Management and Workers' Compensation Division. The Fire Department began certifying facility safety administrators in August 2022. Page 7 of the report shows that recommendation 2.10 to develop employee evacuation and emergency procedure training was fully implemented. The Risk Management and Workers' Compensation Division developed an emergency preparedness training program with 3 virtual trainings on the city's standard response protocols, active shooter awareness, and emergency response teams and evacuations. Proposed changes to Executive Order 65 say that each training is required for new employees, and emergency evacuation and standard response protocol training are to be required annually in line with the International Fire Code. Finally, page 8 of the follow-up report says that recommendation 2.15 to define outcomes and target goals was fully implemented. The Department of General Services defined its intended outcomes and target goals for assessing the notification system's effectiveness in an updated employee notification system policy. Any test is deemed successful if delivered to at least 95% of intended recipients. The city's executive order now includes links to the relevant safety standards, which allows city staff responsible for implementing the order to be aware of other associated safety documents and procedures. And because the Department of Finance also communicated information related to the standards, we have more assurance that the responsible parties have the necessary knowledge needed for safety and security. And by establishing roles and responsibilities and documenting policies and procedures for the emergency response team, people responsible for ensuring safety and security in individual agencies and communicating information to staff will be more informed of city safety procedures. And by implementing a facility safety administrator certification program and developing employee evacuation and emergency procedure training, the city can help ensure those responsible for safety, as well as all city employees, are appropriately trained. It can also help ensure the city is compliant with the fire code. And finally, by updating its employee notification policy with defined targets and goals for measuring success, the city will help ensure its employee notification system is operating effectively and people are informed of emergency and evacuation situations. I will now pause for comments and questions from the committee or the departments.
Maureen.
I would just like to say that as part of the election judge training that I participated in the last election, I took the active shooter virtual training, and I thought it was very effective. A little kudo.
Other questions? Shall we proceed?
All right, as shown on page 8 of the follow-up report, recommendation 2.1 to prioritize and plan vulnerability assessments was partially implemented. The new Facility Safety and Security Committee identified the completion of assessments as a priority, but as of December 2022, the Denver Security Office was only just conducting its first assessment. The office expected to present it to the committee in January 2023 after our follow-up work was completed. General Services also plans to request more funding in 2024 based on the level of effort required for the assessments. And as stated on pages 9 and 10 of the report, recommendation 2.7 to ensure certification of facility safety administrators was partially implemented. While the Denver Fire Department implemented trainings for administrators in August 2022, the fire department said it was not their responsibility to maintain a list of people who need to be certified. The department said it is up to General Services and Risk Management to determine who should be a facility safety administrator and who needs to become certified. However, neither department maintained a list of employees who need to take the training to ensure they become certified. And as shown on page 10 of the report, recommendation 2.13 to assess existing identity, credential, and access management as part of completing vulnerability assessments has been partially implemented. General Services inventoried current access control systems and created a vulnerability assessment template specifically for systems in line with leading practices. However, the city is yet to complete the assessments, which would allow management to make changes based on identified issues. And as stated on page 11 of the report, recommendation 2.17, to ensure accurate contact information was partially implemented. General Services provided 2 draft versions of reminder emails to encourage employees to update their contact information in Workday. However, General Services could not provide evidence the emails were actually sent to employees with missing contact information or documentation proving contact information had been updated. Without completed vulnerability assessments, including those of identity, credential, and access systems, the city may not be informed of risks at each facility or within each system. And by not maintaining a list of employees required to take facility safety administrator training, employees responsible for facility safety may not be certified as required and informed of safety responsibilities and procedures. And by not actively encouraging employees to update their contact information, there is still a risk that some employees may not receive emergency notifications. I'll now pause here for any other questions from the committee or departments.
Rudy?
I have a question in terms of going back to recommendation 2.1. Did after the first vulnerability assessment has taken place, did you guys report out in the January 2023 meeting with the Safety and Security Committee? Just out of curiosity, did it take place?
So
That was last month. Should have been reported out on.
Were you in that meeting? Okay, sorry. I would have to ask that question of our committee chair. So I'm not entirely sure that has been totally, completely done, that assessment. So the assessments are extensive, and the first building that was done is a rather large building. It was the MY building, Minoru Usui building. What we wanted to do was capture a building that would be fairly complex to do, to monitor the amount of time that would take for someone to actually assess the building. So I'm not sure that the final report is done. I believe there may be a draft report, but probably not at this point a report out to the committee.
Okay.
So that process has not been fully completed. I would say whenever we were going through this audit and the conversations that we had with the auditors, that this is going to be a massive task to undergo in the city. General services alone, just our portfolio, is 165 buildings. So doing assessments across 165, we understand the importance and the critical nature of getting that done. However, the breadth of the work can be slightly overwhelming. So the approach that we were taking as the Denver Security Office in General Services is to figure out what is the ask, what is the amount of work that it's going to take to complete this work. And so that was why the MY building was chosen. That assessment has been ongoing. We are learning that this is going to be a really, really heavy lift. Obviously, we have a lot of challenges with resources across the city, both staffing and funding. So the idea is that to create a self-assessment, and we do have a self-assessment. It's actually being digitized right now, so it'll be much easier for folks to be able to complete those assessments. But what we are looking at doing is phasing how the assessments are done with the different agencies that are responsible for their facilities, because we have Parks and Rec with all of their recreation centers. Department of Transportation Infrastructure also has some facilities. So across the city, it's not just general services, but allow folks the ability to complete the self-assessment, but then also go back through the budget process, the annual budget process, and seek supplemental funds for third party to assist as well. Because again, the breadth of this task is huge. It's quite large, and we learned that through undergoing the self-assessment in the one building that we tried to complete just on our own.
I appreciate the response because the breadth of it is pretty extensive.
It's massive. Yes,
and
sir.
it's a massive challenge and undertaking. I just was curious more about the first steps taking
Yep.
place
And
at this point and the assessment that has taken.
Absolutely, and we're committed to it. It's just understanding how we are going to reasonably do that and sustain it. Because with an assessment, you're not just doing it one and done, right? Security risks change over time, so it's going to have to be something that is done possibly every 5 years. And so understanding what that looks like and understanding the funding that the city is able to commit to that effort among all the other
Plus you have
things that we have in the city.
You have a lot of areas that are very soft in terms of targeting, soft
Absolutely.
targets, and it's a variety of a package, so.
Yeah, and it's not just conducting the assessment, right? It's now once you get those recommendations or those findings from the assessment, how do you then fund any of those costs, right? Those expenses, whether, it could be an operational thing, it could be a human sort of aspect that is very easy from a training perspective that you can address. But our assumption is a lot of our buildings were built in a much different time. The security risks were much different. So capital investments in our infrastructure, what does that look like, and how is that going to be funded? So it's a task we're willing to undertake, but this is something that we will be working on for many, many years.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Sir.
In line with that, I guess, originally, I'm looking at these dates of having been 2021. Say, it turns out what you had to bite off, forget about COVID, was a lot more than what people anticipated you were going to bite off in the first place. So I guess my question is, if we were going to come back and do another, take a look at how you're implementing things, do you have some, and you're talking about, this is kind of like a 5-year rotating program. Do you have some idea, and do you have a schedule, let's say, going over the next 5 years of what you're going to cover, so that, from your nodding, obviously what you said in the first place was somewhat optimistic. And now having, tried to go through this whole thing, you've got a better idea of what you're talking about. Have you just established the schedule that somebody could come by and say, in 2 years, how are you coming on it? I'm talking about a more realistic schedule. And is that in process, or?
Absolutely.
Is that a fair question?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Is a very fair question, and it's a conversation that we've had multiple times. I've had with our chief security officer, and I know that the committee, the Facility Safety and Security Committee, has also had that conversation. So, how we are anticipating to look at this, as far as from a planning perspective, is to look at our high risk, because we do have a list of buildings that are more high risk, and then maybe first tier, second tier, third tier, and so on and so forth. And so looking at these assessments in that light. Now, the self-assessment, I think any agency could hit the ground running and start incorporating the self-assessment in there. However, I think for some of our larger buildings that are potentially high target buildings, that we would probably look for some funding to have a third party investigate those. But the plan is to use sort of that tiered approach, or that phased approach, to look at those over and hopefully have either self-assessments or third-party assessments done within that 5-year sort of time frame.
So are you saying, you're talking about a 5-year period, and if you were to take the high-risk assessments that need to be done, are you saying that those would be done in 5 years, or the high risk would be done sooner? And then if sooner, if we were only to look at the high risk, what would be a reasonable time frame to anticipate for the high risk assessments to be completed?
Sure. I don't want to speak out of turn, because I know the committee has a group that's actually working specifically on vulnerability assessments. So I don't want to speak out of turn, because they're the ones that are putting this into place. But, I would really think that
I never listen to what people say before the but. So now we've got
Sure.
the but, let's hear what is really on your mind.
Yeah. And I mean, realistically, yes, we can do self-assessments in those higher risk buildings. And I think that that would be reasonable to do in the next couple of years. But again, I go back to resources. So if we are able to secure resources, to be able to have third parties, to have third-party funding to go in and do these, obviously they can get done much quicker. If we are using our existing staffing resources to do that, knowing that they already have full-time jobs and that they're already having, managing programs and managing just day-to-day functions, that might take a little bit longer. But if we can secure funding, it'll get done much quicker. Does that answer the question? It doesn't look like it did.
Well, no, then the big question is, when you talk about if we can secure the funding, and I understand that's out of your hands, but who's responsible for providing the funding? Is that the mayor's office, ultimately?
Yes, so we would go through our regular annual budget process. So the 2024 process is coming up here kicks off in the April timeframe. So we will be, for the Denver Security Office, we will be asking for funding through our operational budget. So this wouldn't be a capital item or anything like that. We would ask for it through our regular operational budget for professional services.
Well, I think to add to that, the term, our biggest target hazard is very ambiguous from the perspective of there's a lot of different targets at every one of these buildings that maybe one person that thinks that their building is prioritized is not prioritized over another, depending on what we're faced with within the city at any given time. Speaking to the funding piece, we've pulled 6 people off of their jobs that they normally do within the fire prevention division and created a community risk reduction program, as well as an outreach program that will assess risk throughout the entire city, not just for city buildings, but that'll be all encompassing. And I think that we'll have a better idea when we have some dedicated people that can look at this, of giving you a timeline on the exact target hazards and when we can actually address those. And then also having a system, without speaking to what the committee members speak to, but from what I do on a daily basis, is we have different buildings throughout the city that we have aligned with different trainings, as well as aligned with the different target hazards that are addressed for those buildings. So we'll do the same within these 180 roughly structures that we have. So we'll make sure that we address those when we do an overall citywide audit, that we work with other public safety members, and then we can work in conjunction with the other groups. Because I feel that sometimes, at risk of us taking on all the responsibility, this is not necessarily the wheelhouse of different people, where it is for us that have been responding to emergencies in the city for myself, 25 years.
On a different follow-up recommendation, the certification of the facility safety administrators, the fire department doesn't want to keep track of that. I respect that, but who is going to keep track of that?
I would not have necessarily put that in there. I didn't answer that question in that way. So that I would say the difficulty with that is that we don't know who gets onboarded or who leaves different facilities. That's the most difficult part. But I think what General Services and what Risk has done an amazing job of is creating kind of a subcategory program with, and I don't want to steal your thunder, but with if there's people missing or there's not people there, there is a program where people know they can fill in on those different areas. And without having the ability to track all that, we've still tried to overcome that by ensuring that we do have other people in place. And just as importantly is, part of the reasoning behind that was we couldn't do 3 years because one of the implemented processes is an Acela program that we've only had for 2 years. So we couldn't say, yeah, we've been doing that for 3 years, because it's not possible, because we haven't been collecting the data for that long. So I think that's kind of a better way to answer that question. And we are tracking that. We have recently done even another FSA. We did classes on the 9th, 10th, and 11th of January, 10 more people. We do have a licensing programs within the Fire Prevention Division for contractors and everyone else, and we also now have that system in place that's tracking all the FSA as well. So we do have some tracking of the licensure. The difficult part is that we don't know who gets onboarded or who leaves these different facilities, and during COVID it was incredibly difficult to know that. So I think that better speaks to that sentence, but I would love for that to be removed.
Who put it in?
We have a lot of people that got that interview.
That was rhetorical.
It was a big interview.
And I will just add to that, that when we were working on who should be certified, we had a lot of discussions with our facilities team, and we all agreed that the facility superintendent, and we had those tracked, but then when we were asked by the auditor, we suddenly realized we were not tracking who it would be that was not part of a facility managed building. So that's where some of those gaps were that we're addressing.
Can't Workday help keep track of this?
Do you use Workday?
Fair question.
Religiously, yes.
Yes.
Well, I'm thinking, when someone leaves employment with the city, you have to turn in your key, you have to turn in your badge, things like that. And there's a checklist of things that we go through, that HR goes through. And this could be one of them, if you're the facility safety administrator, that you are notified, or your office is notified. I mean,
Is it just that they haven't organized reports for you to address this kind of thing?
I think that's part of it, and also there's some firewalls in place that we don't always talk to one another within these groups for that term. So I think it would be difficult to, we can do it, but to your point, it's difficult for something that if someone does leave, how are we going to be notified for that? And we'd have to set that up in Workday, and it's not always an easy task. But yes, certainly, I think that we can address that.
Continue with finding 2. As stated on page 11, recommendation 2.2 to document implementation rationale has not been implemented. The city has made some changes to facility safety and security practices since our original audit. For example, there is now a virtual tool for emergency response coordinators to use to check in during drills and emergency situations. However, those changes were not made based on the results of completed vulnerability assessments. And as stated on page 12 of the follow-up report, recommendation 2.8 to review and approve emergency procedures guides was not implemented. The Denver Fire Department reviews building emergency procedures guides every 3 years when a new international fire code is adopted. Because the 2021 International Fire Code had not yet been fully adopted, the fire department had not begun reviewing emergency procedures guides. Once it is adopted, they said they would begin reviewing all 181 building emergency procedures guides. And on page 13 of the follow-up report, recommendation 2.9 to track fire drill data was not implemented. While the Denver Fire Department fills out a record of fire drill form, writes a letter detailing a grade of pass, fail, or needs improvement after each fire drill is completed, and stores the letters for 3 years, they do not track the results of these letters. The fire department said they could not implement a tracking mechanism without a dedicated program to identify and prioritize local risks, but the department was denied funding for the program in 2023. Even without the funding for the program, the Denver Fire Department could still use resources it already has, such as other data tracking software or spreadsheets to track fire drill data and results to identify trends and opportunities for training. And as shown on page 13, recommendation 2.11 to centralize identity, credential, and access management has not been implemented. General Services identified all city and county buildings the Denver Security Office oversees access management systems for. However, there are still 13 other systems that General Services will need to coordinate administrative users to ensure safety and security. A group within the Safety and Security Committee is working on finalizing proposed changes to related Executive Order 6, but they have not been completed. Similarly, recommendation 2.12 on page 14 to update Executive Order 6 is not implemented. The Facility Safety and Security Committee needs to work with individual agencies to develop a detailed profile of each system before it can make informed decisions about proposed changes to the order. And recommendation 2.14 on page 14 to update Executive Orders. Recommendation 2.14 on page 15 to develop policies and procedures for identity, credential, and access management is not implemented because the city still needs to centralize management over systems and update Executive Order 6. However, the Denver Security Office says it has other procedures which will serve as a model when the committee is ready to develop and document policies and procedures. And as stated on page 15 of the report, recommendation 2.16 to develop contact information policies and procedures was not implemented. General Services was not able to provide policies and procedures because the employees responsible for those documents recently left the city. So without completed vulnerability assessments, the city continues to implement new safety and security processes in reaction to events and not because of identified risks. If the fire department and city are not reviewing building emergency procedures guides, they may not be current and reflect processes in line with employee training or the fire code. Additionally, staff and contractors may be misinformed on appropriate drill and evacuation procedures due to outdated and inaccurate information. Without a formal process to track fire drill data, the fire department is still not able to identify trends related to evacuation and fire drills to make informed decisions regarding training for city employees. Additionally, Executive Order 6, related to identity, credential, and access management, remains outdated. And finally, without documented policies and procedures that meet leading practices, employee information in Workday may not be as up-to-date as possible, and processes for monitoring and updating information may be lost if responsible parties leave the city. I will now pause here for any comments from the committee or departments.
Questions from the committee? It seems like Executive Order 6 is central to really completing all of this, and it's not that you're rejecting the recommendations, it's really an issue of timing. Is that fair?
It is, and again, I go back to the fact that we are very decentralized, and so, making sure that we understand each of the systems, why we have separate systems, what is the need, is there the ability to have fewer systems, access control systems in the city that are managed more centrally. Obviously, the airport, our safety partners, they have very specific needs for having a separate system and managed separately from what we do in general services. However, there are smaller systems that are throughout the city. And so it was a large undertaking to just inventory what was out there, but now we need a more detailed analysis as far as what those systems are. But I think we can, through the Facility Safety and Security Committee, come to some consensus about those changes to Executive Order 6. But you are correct. There are, I think, 3 or 4 different recommendations that are kind of a domino effect to XO 6 being updated.
Jack?
Let me ask this question, and it may be an unfair question of you. On a number of things you've talked about, you talk about the decentralization, which impedes what you're doing or makes it more difficult. And I guess the question I have is, do you think somebody ought to take a look at whether things are too decentralized in general in this area as a general business proposition? Or do you think it's just affecting your area, and when you look at everything else, it seems to be okay?
I think that's a very fair question, and so I'll give you sort of my thoughts, and I would.
And I recognize that,
Yep.
by the way, it's your thoughts.
Yes.
And
My
it's
opinion on the
not
matter.
necessarily
Absolutely.
the official position of
Absolutely.
of your group. Okay.
So we have had some conversations about this, and I think there are some very positive things that can come from a decentralized system, and meaning that, whenever we look at potentially security, say in a courthouse versus a rec center, and those are very, very different. They operate very, very differently. It does make sense that, someone that is boots on the ground in a rec center would have safety and security protocols in place for that particular building based on that customer base and based on that specific facility. So it would be quite challenging as a city to have, I believe, one one centralized sort of approach to that. And how we looked at that, because we had a lot of conversation about it as we were creating the strategic plan alongside the mayor's office, is that to keep sort of the same general decentralized feel, but to bring together this committee of, I believe it's 16 different agencies that are really managing and maintaining safety and security for the city. And that way we have a committee approach to how we can come together on the common themes, but allow for some independence as well to operate and function appropriately with those, with our different types of facilities, because they are can be so different in many respects. But using that committee to come to a common ground on things that we need to agree on. For instance, access control, some of the training that Devron and the risk management folks are doing. But we have had some of that conversation, but that is my opinion. I think the committee is a good step in the right direction, but certainly, I think there are areas for improvement and additional conversation in the future.
Let me ask you this. Talk about a committee of 16 people. You can get into a situation where the committee is so large that it becomes, listening to what you're saying, there's a lot of diversity here. Is there you might want to think about reorganizing the committee into a few subcommittees with groups or whatever, but it just strikes me as the group may be too large in and of itself, the way it works, to be as effective as it might be if you reorganize that a little bit.
Absolutely. Point well taken. So we do a couple of things that I think help with the size of the group is, while we don't call them subcommittees, we call them work groups, that they're focused on the different areas that were outlined in the auditor's report. And so those different focus areas that we need to have some movement on. And so the subcommittees will come back and make recommendations to the larger group. That said, there is a very formalized voting process that's in place that we have identified through the strategic plan. So whenever there is an action, a recommendation, something on the floor that needs to be moved on, there's a voting process. So we don't get bogged down in the, one person saying no and it kind of dies on the floor.
Okay, we've got one more finding to get through. John Michael, are you going to do this one?
I am.
Thank you.
On page 16, finding 3 states the city is not always receiving security services in line with contract requirements or leading practices. We provided 3 recommendations for finding 3. The city fully implemented 1 and partially implemented 2. As stated on page 16, recommendation 3.3 to develop well-defined contract performance measures was fully implemented. General Services' updated security training, staffing, and reporting requirements now align with leading practices. In addition, General Services implemented a quarterly scorecard process to monitor the security contractor, which requires performance improvement plans for lower scores. By updating training and staffing requirements and evaluating performance on a regular basis, the city can help ensure security services are effectively staffed and monitored. I'll now pause for any questions or comments before moving on to the partially implemented recommendations.
Shall we continue?
As stated on page 17, recommendation 3.1 to develop a contract monitoring program was partially implemented. General Services made improvements to its contract monitoring process by developing a quarterly scorecard procedure. However, contract monitoring staff are not using the scorecards consistently, and General Services did not document specific procedures for completing the form or provide formal training. As stated on page 18, recommendation 3.2 to update post orders was partially implemented. The new post orders, for example, now include some position-specific policies and procedures that were missing in the original audit. Although the updated post orders are an improvement, certain policies and procedures are still missing. For example, emergency procedures are still missing for some of the buildings. Unless staff are properly trained on how to consistently complete security evaluations, it's possible gaps in security may go unresolved. Without complete policies and procedures, the city's post orders remain insufficient to ensure the security provider fully complies with the contract and leading practices. That concludes our presentation, and we'll now open the floor for any other comments or questions.
Questions? Any closing comments from the auditees?
I would just like to extend my appreciation, and we always appreciate you coming in and assisting us. We know that there's so much work to do here. We have a wonderful partnership with General Services, the Fire Department, the Police Department, Office of Emergency Management, OHR, whose training team pivoted to prioritize these emergency preparedness trainings that we wanted to be a requirement for all city employees. So a lot of work has been done. And, you know, again, in this very fluid environment where we'll train everyone on what to do, and then everyone goes home. And now we're in a hybrid environment, and we have to retrain. And, you know, just trying to work through what ideal training looks like, and how do we get people out of the building in the event of an emergency when it's a lot. There's a lot of creativity that's gone into it, but acknowledging how much work has been done and will continue to be done.
Thank you. I think we all appreciate the scope of what you have in front of you and the importance of it too. So thank you very much. All right, we have another presentation about our audit analytics update. I'd like to ask Chris Wilson.
Huge job. Oh my gosh.
So this is our audit analytics team headed by Chris Wilson. I am regularly would say that they exceed my expectations in terms of what they're doing. So of course my expectations grow and I ask them to do more. And they do respond very well. So Chris, I'll turn it over to you to introduce the team and begin the presentation.
Great, thank you. So good morning, everyone. We are here to present the semi-annual audit analytics update. The team is comprised of Nicholas Hernan, Daniel Summers, Heather Berger, and myself, and we are under the direction of Don Wiseman. We'll be providing updates in 4 areas today. In each of these areas, we focus on our work that took place from July 2022 through the end of the year. First, we'll summarize the updated results of our continuous audit and risk analytics. Second, we'll provide updates on 2 risk assessments we worked on. Third, we'll discuss our data-related support we've provided to audit teams. And lastly, we'll highlight a few examples of how we've shared our experience in analytics with both the wider audit community and internally. As a reminder, continuous auditing allows us to analyze potential risks by looking at large sets of financial and process data throughout the year. We share our results internally to Auditor's Office leadership to help inform whether an area warrants further testing. This slide summarizes the specific areas covered in the current update period. Overall, our analytics looked through about 1.3 million records and covered 5 different areas. While we are able to look at large amounts of records, our analytics in many cases are designed to be indicators of risk, meaning an analytic may flag transactions that aren't actually issues in the data based on the city's fiscal rules or other criteria. Because of this, to help us make more informed recommendations internally to management, we've developed a new process this time around to learn a little more about our flag transactions. In some cases, this involved taking a small sample of transactions to learn whether each had support documentation and was directly tied to a city expense. And in others, this involves summarizing the results using key fields such as agency or cost center to identify more specific trends in the data. I'll now discuss the updated results for our purchase card analytics. For this area, we use a composite model that aggregates the results of 6 risk flags. Our risk flags include checking for things like even dollar purchases, split transactions that may exceed the city's spending limit, or purchases made at pass-through vendors such as Amazon or Venmo. We applied these flags to all purchase card transactions made from January 2018 through December 2022. Of the roughly 331,000 total transactions, there were about 9,000 that triggered 2 or more risk flags. On this slide, we show the changes in average risk score across time. The score is based on the number of flagged transactions compared to the total transactions made each month. We've zoomed in on the y-axis, showing the score, to highlight some variations. Overall, the risk score hovers between 0.73 and 0.83. We do, however, see a gradual increase in score since the mid-2021 time period. Given this gradual increase, we took a sample of transactions with 2 or more flags to learn more. For all transactions sampled, we found each had documentation justifying the expense. Therefore, we don't recommend any action be taken in this area, but we will continue to monitor purchase cards in our next update. I'll now turn to our update for travel card spending.
One quick question. You said that there was at a minimum, two flags that surfaced and brought your attention. What would be the most common areas in terms of those red flag indicators in terms of the purchasing card program?
So in this period, at least, the most common flags that were triggered were the top spender flag and then the flag associated with pass-through vendors. And in our sample, that played out as well. So in the sample, each transaction that we looked at had at least one of those 2 flags present. And so.
And how do you define a top spender?
So we define it by 80% of the transactions being associated with 20% of the possible people having a purchase card.
Okay. And those people are the top spenders?
Right, 20%. Exactly, yeah. And we look at that just based on sheer volume. The risk being that since they're doing the most spending, we want to keep our eyes on those. In case there's an issue, then there could be a wider issue to look at.
Yeah, I know you're looking for the outliers and stuff in terms of the top spenders that you were but I was more or less associating that with the amount of money being spent in terms, I understand your percentage, it's the top 20 that are spending more like 80% of the budget.
Right.
And so that's what you're focusing on, so large purchases of that nature.
Exactly. Yeah. So, and to add some context, of the transactions with 2 or more risk flags, that was associated with about 3.4 million in total spending. I don't have the number off right now for those that triggered the top spender flag, but overall, the ones with 2 or more flags, 3.4 million.
Thank you, Chris.
So Chris, I have a question, I'm sorry.
Oh, no worries.
This data just is so fascinating. So you're showing an increase, and you say there's an increase in the risks that you're finding, the risk score, but you've done a sample and said, actually, things are fine. We're not finding anything. So what is increasing the risk then?
So
the risk score?
So those are the transactions that were.
But why? I get the numbers behind it, but what I'm wondering is why are there more top spenders now than there were, 2 years ago?
Right. So I don't have that specific cause.
No.
Based on our analytics, we just kind of look at
The numbers.
the indicators. Yeah, exactly.
What's your gut telling you? Or
So Well, one hunch is specifically within this last 6-month period, there are more purchases being made through Amazon. So overall, the proportion of transactions through P-cards, that has increased, and it's tripping the flag associated with the pass-through vendors, because that's one of the vendors, we put on the list. So that's more than a hunch. That is actually in the data. However, I don't know the underlying cause related to the top spender from our results.
Isn't it? Shopping through Amazon?
Yes. Oh, for sure.
Various vendors that
And
you've
Amazon
listed?
gave you a
Absolutely.
greater market share.
Absolutely. It's definitely more common. And that's why we thought it was especially important. So given this increase, we wanted to have some assurance that just because the risk level seems to be rising, these are valid purchases, and therefore not warranting any further investigation, at least for the time being. Of course. So in terms of travel card spending, our analytics looks at and flags potential non-travel related items. We use the credit card's merchant category codes to flag codes that don't explicitly appear related to travel spending. As we highlight here on this slide, 94% of the overall spending is associated with codes that are clearly travel related. However, we do note an increase associated with potential risky spending since the pandemic period ended, starting in late 2021. And this trend is visualized here on this next slide. So this graph shows the city's total travel card spending by month, grouped by level of risk. Focusing on the last 6 months of 2022, we see December, the farthest bar on the right-hand side, is largely responsible for this slight increase in high-risk spending. And again, in this area, given this increase associated with the high-risk merchant category codes, we look through a sample of transactions from this group. For every sampled item, we found evidence that the expense was in fact related to travel costs based on the support documentation provided in Workday. In preparation for our next analytics update, we can use these results to look at the codes we previously considered higher risk just based on their descriptions and perhaps move those down into the lower risk category. Therefore, similar to purchase cards, we don't recommend any action on this analytic, but we'll continue to monitor the results in our next update.
What are some of the higher risk codes that you're...
Yeah, so a few examples are codes that have the description of computers or, that code, since it's not explicitly travel related, will get flagged when it's used on a travel card. However, someone could be traveling for a conference and have to purchase something related to computers that trips that code.
It is kind of curious that the biggest little red box there is December.
Yes.
Usually in December, that's when they try to spend all the, whatever they're projecting as a fund balance. Isn't that so? Is that?
Oh, that's a better thought than buying Christmas presents.
These are travel purchases.
Well, how restrictive are those? Yeah, does that mean that, for instance, codes like a convenience store or a grocery store is a high risk in
Exactly.
that category?
At
It's
least
not restricted, though, right? It's not prohibited.
And in our definition, those would be examples that we've currently categorized as higher risk ones.
Things like department stores would be prohibited from use in a travel card, right? Or not? Do the travel cards have any restrictions as far as
They
the
do.
type of merchant?
Yeah, it has to be related to travel or related to...
I'm sorry, I didn't ask that very well. I'm sure it's supposed to be, but what I'm saying is that
Actually, when you go to use it, you
yeah,
get
at the state
rejected.
you would get rejected if you tried to use a travel card at, I think, a C-store. I'm not. Maybe it was a department store.
I think some MCC or merchant category codes are restricted and declined upon attempting that.
Okay.
So what we've categorized in the analytic is the ones that go through, but just don't have that explicit description of travel or hotel,
Gas station
airfare.
or-
yeah,
right.
exactly.
Yeah, because I would suspect like liquor purchases.
Exactly. Those are
I mean,
prohibited.
that's strictly prohibited.
Yes, definitely.
The only thing I want to add to this conversation, because I rarely get to add anything to this conversation, is with merchant accounts and the codes. So back in banking, back in the day, when a merchant came in to open up a merchant account, it was up to the bank to determine the code, right? So, and that gets pushed down further and further, down to lower level employees. Point in case, I just got my Chase year end where I spent all my money on my credit card last year, and being a banker, I'm going through line by line by line. And it is crazy how a donation that I made shows up under grocery store. Or, so do you find much of that the merchant codes themselves are wrong and the charge itself might be legit?
Yes, exactly. So this sampling effort that we just performed is very helpful for that exact reason, because the descriptions don't always align with what is actually being purchased. So for instance, in the sample that we tested, 11 of the transactions were conference registration, which is allowed to use a travel card for that. However, the codes were all over the place in terms of the data. So that's something that we'll now use moving forward and seeing if there's specific codes that, like I said, that we should bring down to that lower level risk group because we know they're being used consistently for.
It is inaccurate going in. It doesn't make your job any easier.
Right, exactly.
I was very surprised because I just would have thought, and since my years of programming those damn machines to make the codes, that there'd be a better system, but it was crazy, the errors that I found just personally, so.
Definitely, yeah, thank you. We'll now pass it off to Daniel to discuss our analytic regarding expense reports.
Thanks, Chris. The city uses expense reports to reimburse employees when they make business-related purchases using their own money. We use a composite model here also to monitor these 3 different risk indicators. The top spender risk indicator tracks employees who receive the largest cumulative amount of money from the city through reimbursements. Benford's Law looks at the first digit in a group of transactions to see if their distribution aligns with what is expected and flags transactions that don't follow a natural distribution. And the even dollar risk indicator flags transactions with a total amount that is divisible by 10. Our analysis for, what's that?
Could you give a capsule description of Benford's Law?
Yeah.
Because there is a test, and we want to make sure we pass.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. So Benford's Law is really this idea that if you look at
know about it, yeah.
Oh, no, totally.
And I have to say, I think every year you guys explain this to me. Every year I'm like,
Every 6
what's
months we
Benford's Law?
Oh, yeah, no, happy to do it. So Benford's Law understands that if you look at a group of naturally occurring transactions, the first significant digit of each of those transactions is going to fall along a pretty regular distribution. So you would expect to see the number 1 a certain amount of times, number 6 a certain amount of times, et cetera. And so when you look at the first significant digit of transactions and you see that a certain digit is appearing in an irregular way, so maybe there's more 6s than you expect, it's just an indicator of possibly something to look into. And so that's what we do here is we just look at the natural distribution, and if a certain digit appears out of alignment, then it's flagged for this specific risk.
I want to say that Benford established this law in the 1800s at some point. Is that correct? Yeah.
Been used for quite some time.
Quite old, yeah. Our analysis for the update included about 50,000 expense report line items. This slide shows a breakdown of the items that were flagged by at least one of our risk indicators. As you can see, the top spender risk is the largest group, and it contains about 32,000 flagged transactions. When the circles overlap, that means the transactions triggered more than one risk flag. For example, there are only 430 transactions that triggered all 3 risk flags. We analyzed the most recent 6 months of records to look for any changes compared to the last time we analyzed these risks. In the last 6 months, we found the number of transactions flagged by the even dollar and Benford's Law risk indicators decreased, while the number of transactions flagged by the top spender risk indicator increased about 1%. At this point, these changes do not appear significant enough to warrant a full audit, but we will continue to monitor these trends. Any questions before we move on?
I do have one question. In terms, when you come up with 430 incidents where it involves all 3 factors, Does anybody in the shop take the next step and say, well, let me look into a sample of whatever and see how it plays out, just out of curiosity?
So we've started incorporating that practice this time around. However, we didn't for this specific area, given that decrease overall compared to the last period. But for instance,
You answered my question. I just.
Okay.
But, you know,
Great.
if you want to give me embellish on the answer, that's fine.
I was just going to add that, for instance, in the next period, if we do see an increase compared to what we're reporting at now, that might then trigger us to say, okay, we're going to make sure we have enough time to sample
To do a more sample.
from that area as well.
I'll be discussing continuous audit analytics related to supplier invoices and purchase orders. In response to supplier invoices, the city creates physical checks and holds those checks to be picked up by a supplier. We track both the number of checks held for pickup and the sum of money associated with held checks. In the second half of 2022, the number of checks held for pickup increased compared to the first half of the year. The sum associated with those held checks increased substantially in the second half of 2022. As this graph illustrates, there has been a significant spike in the sum of money associated with held checks, reaching a peak of $13.2 million in October 2022. The number of checks held for pickup has also increased significantly, with 181 held checks created in August of last year. Throughout 2020 and 2021, the number of checks held for pickup seldom reached 100 per month. However, the second half of 2022 saw that number exceed 150 each month from August through the end of the year. To provide some context related to this risk, in the second half of 2022, 43% of supplier invoices were paid using a check. The other 57% of supplier invoices were paid using ACH payment, an electronic funds transfer payment method. Of those check payments, which again comprise 43% of supplier invoices in the second half of 2022, about 4% were held for pickup. We performed an analysis of this increased risk level. Much of the increase in the sum of money held in checks is attributable to several multi-million-dollar checks issued in the second half of 2022. In the first half of that year, the largest amount held in a check was $1,035,000. In the second half of the year, there were 3 held checks with amounts of $7.9 million, $5.3 million, and $4.2 million. In relation to the increase in the number of checks held for pickup in the second half of the year, we found specific cost centers tied to this increase. However, the risk is not concentrated in a single cost center, and we found no pattern across time compared to the prior periods. This work has been documented and will be available for use in future analytics and related audits. The next section of this presentation will focus on risk analytics pertaining to purchase orders. A purchase order is a documented authorization to acquire goods or services from a vendor or supplier. A range of analytics are applied to purchase order transactions, including analyses of unauthorized purchases, duplicate transactions, even dollar purchases, and shipping addresses associated with purchase orders. We perform continuous auditing related to 3 types of unauthorized purchases. After the fact orders refer to instances where a valid procurement mechanism exists, but the purchase was made prior to the issuance of a purchase order. Fiscal rule violations involve purchases under $10,000 made without a valid procurement mechanism, and code violations refer to purchases over $10,000 made without a valid procurement mechanism.
What's the difference between the fiscal rule violation and a code violation?
Just the amount of money involved. I think a code violation is going to be when it's over $10,000. That's the only difference, I think.
Gotcha. Thanks.
The number of unauthorized purchases has been increasing over the past 2 years. That increase is evident across all 3 types of unauthorized purchases examined. By far, the most significant increase is related to fiscal rule violations involving purchases under $10,000 made without a valid procurement mechanism. There were 44 fiscal rule violations in October of 2022. That is the highest number of monthly violations identified since the analytics team began tracking. We investigated this increase in fiscal rule violations and identified cost centers and suppliers associated with the increase. However, the increased risk is not concentrated in a single cost center or in relation to a specific supplier, and we found no pattern across time compared to the prior periods. This work has been documented and will be available for use in future analytics and related audits.
With this increase, you know, what you're saying is you're not sure it's any given cost center.
So what
But is this indicating some kind of sloppiness at some level that's causing this to go up? And you have to investigate it, but it begs the question, I guess, is.
Yes, so I think it's important to really think about the process involved. So when a purchase order is submitted to a buyer who is going to eventually acquire those goods for the city, once they receive a purchase order, and I have it here, is first of all, they're going to check if it had cost center approval, which is a very important control. And if it doesn't have that, it's not the good. It's not going to continue along. That's going to be stopped there. However, if it has cost center approval, it can still have again be marked as an unauthorized purchase. So as I said, with the after the fact purchases refer to situations where there is a master purchase order in place, and it's just that the issuance of the purchase order is, sorry, I have the definition here somewhere. Yeah, if a contract already exists, then the purchase is marked as an after the fact purchase. However, if no contract exists, then a UNA form is completed by the buyer. So it gets the purchase order gets created even though there may have been issues with no master purchase order being in place. However, the buyer will then complete a form and return, let the purchaser know who issued that purchase order that there was an issue with that. And so I suppose in response to your question, yes, I think it's fair to say that looking at these numbers, a better job could be done in complying with the policies and procedures.
But essentially, the city is aware of this when it happens, and there are controls to monitor those when there's invalid purchase mechanism.
How is that?
No.
Aware of it when it happens. What does that mean?
So all of these issues that you're seeing, the city is fully aware of these, and I think it's important to note that there are controls in place. So particularly, and I think a good example is when a code violation is found, so a purchase above $10,000 that doesn't comply with the policies and procedures in place, the director of the agency will have to sign to complete that purchase order to make sure it goes through and the goods are acquired. They're going to go back to whoever issued it and say there are issues here, and they need, they're going to need approval from somebody above that, from the head of that department to comply. So all of these issues they're documented and they're corrected in step, if that makes sense. They get submitted to the buyers. The buyers understand that there's an issue. They correct the issue. They create a form marking that there was an unauthorized purchase issue here. Again, I think there is training provided from that in an attempt to stop future unauthorized purchases from occurring.
But
So
meanwhile,
Nicholas-
the purchase has already been made.
Yeah.
Well,
That's by definition, it's unauthorized until later on they get the purchase order completed.
correct, and that correct. So yes, everything gets corrected, and there are good controls in place. I think it's fair to say, looking at this process. However, it is still, obviously there are policies and procedures in place, and it shouldn't, ideally it wouldn't come to an intermediary to step in and make sure that all the documentation had been required or whatever is needed for to fully comply with the purchasing policies and procedures.
So if I'm reading this chart, So the last 3 months, in October, November, December, there's about 10 cases that were looked at. And so from what I'm understanding, at all 10 cases, although there was a code violations, after the fact, someone came back to approve the transaction that took place. Am I reading the chart right, and also your interpretation?
Yes, that is correct. That these purchases all went through, and again, the city is going to be aware of all of these as a form would have been completed. And again, the idea being, I think, that training is to be provided afterwards, and obviously.
That's reassuring.
But I think it is fair to say it's important to note as well on the risk here is that there is a risk. Obviously, when policy and procedures aren't followed, it's never good. But also there is a risk that in terms of the purchase ordering process that the city needs to make sure that they're getting the best price that they can for these goods. And I think it's fair to say that when any of these issues are arising, is there is an increased risk that the city is going to be not getting the best price that they can for the goods.
Yeah, I just have to say, I think that the assumption that everything's okay because the paperwork was completed eventually is not a good assumption, because in my experience, that's like papering over the mistake, and whether or not the purchase was valid, it can only be evaluated before it's made. If it's already made, what are they going to do? They're going to make a purchase order because they've already got the stuff, right? I mean,
Legitimize it.
yeah, exactly. So, I mean, we don't have to. I go into that. I mean, there's nothing at that point to do. But I'm just like, I don't think the conclusion that everything is okay because training's going to happen is the right conclusion.
Well, and that's fair, and that's why we do monitor this as part of our continuous audit analytic update. However, we just want to bring additional context in about the controls when these issues do arise. So from our perspective, that's just what we wanted to provide for you all when you see this uptick.
I'll be real curious to see what the next 6 months do, because
So
it's
could you
twice
provide
as high.
some information about how many purchase orders go through that are not out of compliance with either the code or fiscal rule?
Yeah, I don't think, do we have, we don't have that right now, but we can supply it. Because, yeah, the vast majority are not going.
Well, this is only 400 or so.
You don't have a ballpark figure of?
It's probably $1 million. No.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
What's the range?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And it's even.
I just think this.
So we have the number for purchase order transactions, and that's that's around 250,000. I think it was on one of the first slides.
It's not higher.
Excuse me, was that $250,000 or 250,000 transactions?
Transactions.
So I guess the question that I have, and you may not have it handy at the moment, but it's numbers of transactions, but the question is, what's happening in terms of dollars?
Sure.
In other words, looking at the chart, you've got numbers of transactions. I guess if the next time around, we could get it in dollars.
Certainly.
Well, all of these are under 10,000
That's the.
by definition.
No, but what's the total dollars that are involved with that?
That's information we can provide in the next update.
Yeah, that's what I meant.
Definitely.
Yeah, yeah, that's all.
And for additional context, of the total transactions, it's of purchase order transactions, it's around $9.6 billion. So it's a lot of money.
Well, that was
associated
what I
with
was-
the total.
Yeah.
Right.
0.6 billion?
Yeah, I believe for
we'll talk.
for our period from 2018 to 2022. That total.
City budget.
Well, the general fund's around 1.6 billion, so.
Well, if we could get it next time, it'd be fine.
I think
mean,
we'll
we don't
provide
need to
more.
belabor it, as far as I'm concerned. But I would like to, if the next time, we could see you know, what we're talking about in dollars as well as,
Definitely.
yeah, if you don't mind.
That's the same number we'll be reporting when we talk about shipping addresses too, is over the last 5 years, it's $9.2 billion. That's in the safe category. The risk category is much smaller.
Duplicate transactions refer to any pair of transactions with identical payment amounts and similar supplier names. We perform continuous auditing to identify duplicate transactions present in purchase order, purchase card, and travel card data. In the second half of 2022, the number of potential duplicate transactions has decreased, with a reduction in the risk associated with duplicate transactions between purchase orders and purchase cards, and also a reduction in the risk associated with duplicate transactions between purchase cards and travel cards. Even dollar transactions involve payments that are evenly divisible by 1, 10, 100, 1,000, and so on, depending on the data being analyzed. In relation to city purchase order transactions, we focus on transactions evenly divisible by 100. It is important to note that the presence of round numbers in purchase order data is not a direct indication of abnormal or suspicious behavior. However, when paired with complementary analytics and a strong understanding of the data being analyzed, even dollar analysis can be an extremely powerful tool in the continuous auditing process. Since the beginning of 2018, about 10% of city purchase order transactions are evenly divisible by 100. In the second half of 2022, the total number of even dollar transactions decreased. Any questions on even dollar purchases? I will now hand it over to Heather Berger to discuss the continuous auditing applied to shipping address data in city purchase order transactions.
Thanks, Nick. Yeah, so we're still talking about purchase orders here, just specifically the shipping addresses that are in the data included in a purchase order. And so the analytic that we created in this area compares the purchase order shipping addresses to city-owned or operated facility addresses. This allowed us to separate the data into two distinct populations: shipping addresses that match verified city addresses and shipping addresses that do not match city verified addresses. Those that do not match comprise the risk population. In the last 5 years, 99% of all purchase order transactions were associated with a verified city address. This accounts for $9.2 billion worth of spending, which is also 99% of all spending in that same time period. This leaves the risk population to make up only 1% of all transactions, which is a slight improvement from our last update. However, it still adds up to about $52 million. So we were interested in learning more to assess the level of risk. To do this, we decided to take a statistical sample of the full population and assess two separate attributes. First, whether the address corresponded to a city facility, and second, whether the expense associated with the purchase order was related to city operations. We found false positives in every transaction we sampled, meaning our analytic flagged transactions that were actually allowable because the data that we were using and we processed through the analytic was lacking information for the analytic to correctly identify the transaction as being safe. Examples of this include city addresses that were not included in our city address list and vendor addresses that we didn't include in the analytic because we didn't have a list for vendor addresses. The risk was anything going outside of an established city facility location or establishment. So in doing this sample and discovering that we had some false positives and seeing that our analytic lacked in a couple areas is a good explanation and kind of speaks to the conversation we had earlier with MCC codes as to why we feel it's necessary to take on the new approach that we've mentioned and sample the risk population before making a final determination and potentially providing data to audit teams. Further, it allows us to enhance the efficiency and accuracy of each of our analytics, kind of improving the health of our analytics in a way.
Anything going out of state?
I recall at this time, so we specifically, the way that the analytics designed is we separate it from inside Denver and outside Denver. And so most things are inside Denver, but as you know, I mean, there's a lot of logical reasons to send something outside of Denver, as we own many things that are outside city limits. But that comes to mind immediately. I can't think of anything out of state. Yeah, that would definitely be a risk. So this, it probably looks very familiar to you all. We've presented this in our last update and the one previously as well, I believe. But when we presented this information in the past, the blue and red dots represented risky and safe locations, respectively. However, now that we know that analytic returns false positives, our results are less definitive, which is why we use verified and non-verified labels. The blue dots represent verified city locations, and the red dots represent non-verified locations. It's also important to keep in mind that each dot represents only one location, but it can also represent many transactions. Like I mentioned earlier, the red dots you see make up only 1% of all transactions over the last 5 years. Our work moving forward will now focus on testing the non-verified locations to create a more comprehensive list of city addresses and potentially create a list of verified vendor addresses, now that we know that most of the sample was being sent directly to vendors.
So I know you were here for the security and safety of facilities. I mean, there's a population of addresses that they have. Is that what we used?
It actually piqued my interest. I'm not sure if it's the same list. I don't think it is. The list that we are using, and as far as we know, was the best resource we had available to us, was from real estate. But we are finding that it's actually not very comprehensive, which we did an audit of real estate a couple years ago, and that was a finding there as well. So that was no surprise. We're just, as we continue to do our work and improve our analytics, we're continuing to improve the source data that we're using as well.
I'm confused about the vendor address comment you just made. Do you mean, you said ship to vendor addresses. Do you mean that people were picking up the merchandise from vendor
It may not,
locations?
in the sample that we looked at, it didn't appear to be an actual like material that they were picking up. It was like a check that was sent to them. Like maybe they put on a training at a city facility and we were paying them for their services. So they were being paid, and so it was just a check that was being sent directly to their home address. Mm-hmm. Okay, does anybody have any questions about our analytics before we move on to project updates? No? Okay. So our current projects include a risk assessment of the Denver employees' retirement plan and a risk assessment of citywide technology purchases, which is now a full audit. Our objective for the Denver Employees Retirement Plan Risk Assessment is to assess the accuracy of employee and employer contributions and benefit payouts, and whether procedures are compliant with applicable policies. Earlier this week, we completed our planning phase, which consisted of conducting research, interviews, and walkthroughs to inform our scope and analytics. We are now in what we refer to as the fieldwork phase. The executive team requested we conduct this risk assessment and provided us with ideas of where to focus our attention. We presented our proposed scope, analytics, and time frame earlier this week, and now look ahead to receiving the data. Sure.
Sorry, I may have missed it. That was requested by their executive team or you all?
Ours.
I'm assuming that has an annual audit of the, okay. And then retirement plan audits test, I think their sample includes distributions and testing the accuracy. I'm not suggesting this isn't great, but I'm hoping that they're doing one annually themselves.
Might have a better answer to that, but we're looking at the whole population of data where they might be looking at a statistical sample.
Sure, absolutely, okay.
But we are aware
But they
that-
do an audit, right?
Yes, they do every year. Mm-hmm. Yeah, they have an actuary and they do, they perform and publish a report each year, which is public facing.
Thank you, Heather. Another project of ours is looking for technology purchases that don't align with Executive Order 18. In January 2021, Executive Order 18 was updated to outline the procurement process for technology resources. The order specifies that all technology purchases, including both software and hardware, must go through the city's Technology Services Agency. This process allows technology services to make sure all the devices on the city's network are compatible and that they have the right software to keep the city's network protected. The project started with an internal assessment to determine how widespread the issue might be. The memo for that analysis was provided to our executive team in September of last year. The results of our initial analysis warranted a full audit, and we provided our preliminary results to the audit team to assist with their planning phase. We took what we learned from the preliminary analysis and applied it to the full audit to provide the best results possible for the team. For example, we refined our risk indicators to improve their accuracy and developed a risk score so that the team could get a sense of the level of risk for each individual transaction. In addition to identifying the team's population of risky transactions, we also had the opportunity to work with the team throughout the audit, including by helping the team develop their sampling methodology and evaluating their results. The full audit is scheduled for release in May. After the audit is released, we'll incorporate these analytics into our continuous suite so we can monitor the impact the recommendations have on mitigating this risk moving forward. Any questions before I continue? The last 6 months have been quite productive for the audit analytics team, and we've had the chance to work on 7 different full audits that look at a wide range of topics. Most often, we help teams with data analysis. For example, an audit team outlines the testing steps and criteria in their audit program. They request the data needed for testing. Then we use that data to complete the steps in their program and answer the objective. We also help teams with sampling, which is basically helping teams pick out a portion of records from a larger population. This is useful if you want to evaluate a risk, but you don't have enough time to test all the records. We also help teams with technical support, which in this case was providing a technical review to ensure the soundness of the team's methodology. For the audit looking at encampments of people experiencing homelessness, we helped in a few different areas. We helped the team develop a methodology to sample contracts for in-depth testing based on the area of risk. Once they completed their attribute testing, we helped the audit team evaluate the testing results of their sample so they could describe the overall impact. We also helped with data collection and cleaning. We retrieved a data set of records from the city's 311 service and helped them prepare several additional data sets for their analyses. For example, they had several data sets that had encampment information, including addresses. We helped them develop a method to standardize the address format and retrieve a corresponding latitude and longitude. Once the team gathered the latitude and longitudes of the encampment addresses, we created several maps that help highlight significant areas in their audit objectives. This full audit is scheduled for release in April. We also worked on the forthcoming Denver Police Department operations audit. Our work on this project focused on analyzing data related to 4 areas of risk that the audit team identified. We looked at officer response times, or how long it takes an officer to arrive on scene, and looked at the distribution of call times across the city to identify any trends. We also looked at recruitment information and officer retention to describe the department's current process and identify potential opportunities for improvement. Lastly, we evaluated the department's compliance with overtime policies to identify instances where officers may have worked more hours than allowed. This audit is scheduled for release in May. Any questions before we move on? All right, I'll now pass it back to Heather to talk about another project we've worked on.
To highlight some of our work in a slightly different way, we wanted to share with you an example of what our audit support can look like in a published report. You might remember hearing from the Residential Trash, Recycling, and Compost Services audit team in November of last year. In terms of our support for them, we merged, cleaned, prepped, and visualized data sets that the team themselves obtained from 311 platforms. Our results were used to help support the team's first finding, which was the Solid Waste Management Division lacks strategic direction and quality data to inform how it provides services to residents. You likely remember this figure as well from last November, from the November committee, but as a reminder, it displays resident call volumes for those who reported missed pickups. Once we organized the data visually, it was clear to see a spike in missed pickups in January 2022, which coincides with the implementation of a new policy that changed pickup schedules and routes for the first time in 15 years. This supported the audit team's finding by suggesting the new policy was not adequately communicated to residents. There were 5,693 reports of missed pickups after controlling for duplicate calls from the same person, which is over 2,000 more reports when compared to the next highest spike. And in addition to updating our continuous audit analytics and providing audit support, we also offered internal training and presented at several conferences. We offered attribute development, statistical sampling, and Arbutus software trainings internally to our office's staff, totaling nearly 10 continuing professional education credits, which we are required to earn each year to remain compliant with auditing standards. In terms of conferences, we presented at the Institute of Internal Auditors Conference on the topic of using traditional auditing techniques to improve analytics, and we presented at the Rocky Mountain Area Conference on the topic of how regression analysis can be used to support audit findings. Our recent submission to the 2023 Association of Local Government Auditors Conference was approved, and we'll be presenting information on how logistical regression can be used to reduce false positives in analytics. After presenting at a conference, we will also occasionally meet with other audit shops who reach out with questions or request guidance after attending one of our sessions. To wrap up the discussion of our recent activity,
We have a question.
I
Oh,
have
I'm
one
sorry. Yeah,
question.
Rudy.
And the question goes to the fact that it just escaped me. It'll come back to me. I was just disrupted. But it has to do with, just give me a second.
Sure.
It'll come back.
of course. We only have a couple more slides anyway, and then we'll open it back up to questions. So just to wrap up the discussion of our recent activity, here on slide 35 is a visual overview. We provided support on 7 audits, analyzed over 1 million records using 26 different analytics, offered 3 internal training sessions to office staff, and presented at 2 conferences. And as we look ahead to what's next, we anticipate presenting our Denver Employee Retirement Plan results and any potential recommendations internally to management, beginning to plan our next project, continuing to cross-train audit staff to expand analytic skill sets in the office, and preparing for our upcoming conference we just mentioned in May. We also plan to improve our analytics suite by adding a new area of assessment to strengthen our understanding of purchase order shipping location risks. We are currently in the development stage of creating an analytic that will compare shipping addresses to employee addresses. We hope to share results of that analytic with you during our next update. If you remember, that was a discussion in our last committee too. So we took that forward and we've already started designing it. Come back to you.
Do you also provide support in terms of like sampling questionnaires, things of that nature, in order to get more precise data when you're data collecting?
We do.
It sounds like you do.
We do. Just in the last 6 months, we haven't worked on any surveys or questionnaires.
Okay, what about analytical platforms that advising someone how to analyze the information as you lay out the information? In terms of like an Excel spreadsheet or something like that, just to make it so simple.
Sure. Yeah. We do internal trainings. We do an Excel training twice a year. And then Arbutus is a software. It's not necessarily a questionnaire platform, but it's a software that's used for auditing and can be used in visualizations. And
what triggered is when you said you gave a conference on regression analysis, and that's what I figured that triggered the whole thing in terms of your involvement. Just wanted to make sure that was much more clear. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Any other thoughts before we conclude?
All right.
Well, I'd just like to say that, like Leslie, I find this the information fascinating, and appreciate how you all support and also bring up areas that might need, further investigation. So thank you for your.
A lot of data out there whirling around the city.
How big is the analytics team? That's
Us
it.
four.
It's the four of you.
Yeah, so it's changed a bit since you've seen us last.
Wow. And do you have openings, or this is it? You're fully staffed.
Are you looking for a new job?
Oh my gosh. No.
We're looking for an intern, Leslie.
Yeah, we
When
just
you
posted
said
an intern
regression analysis,
position.
the hair on the back of my neck was like, oh my gosh, I remember statistics. No thanks. No, not my fault. Not at all. I guess what I was just kind of getting at is this a difficult position to fill, because it just seems like your experience in education is fairly specific, right? So I was just curious. Hiring, maybe I should be asking Valerie that question.
Well, and also I think what's really impressive about this team is how much they have picked up on supporting individual audits,
Exactly.
because that's extremely useful to, inform that audit work and be able to present some other results that may not otherwise have surfaced.
My take on it, my very ignorant take on this, is that what the analytics team does is really leverage and enhances the audit team to be able to do bigger, better, more accurate. So it's really impressive. I mean, the knowledge and the technology is really impressive.
And we are currently recruiting for an intern.
You are, okay. I'll see if I can go back to school.
Yesterday, we made a presentation at the University of Colorado to a class that invites us back every year, but we did talk a little bit about the data analytics team that we had, and the professor, emphasized to the students that how important data analytics are, and I think he also made a comment that many of the students didn't like data analytics, but I think it's terribly important, and it's a part of auditing that we will see more of in the future.
There's only so much, an auditor can do cracking open the books. You need to be able to really dig into the data.
And the data analytics also really lends a lot of support in terms of your objective scope and methodology when you're presenting to, it makes you more real, makes you more, you're right on, in terms of that.
All right, thank you very much. Our next item is general business. Our next meeting will be Thursday, March 16th, here in the Par Widener Room at 9 o'clock. With that, I'd like to adjourn into executive session to talk about our external audit.
A block and a half would be the Melba Theater. All of these theaters were white theaters with the exception of the Lyric. The Lyric was, I guess we could say, pseudo-integrated because whites sat on the first floor. Blacks were allowed to sit on the second floor in the balcony. I'm entering the lobby for the Lyric Theater for the very first time. When I was here growing up in Birmingham, we would purchase our tickets outside and then walk around to the entrance on the side. I've never been in, this is the very first time that I've ever seen this particular area of the Lyric Theater.
What's it like?
Well, it's amazing because this is not what I remember as the Lyric. The Lyric for me was outside and up these stairs, and usually the stairs were rather dark. And we would come in this door and go up these stairs to the balcony, and in many cases, as we would go up the balcony, we really never decided to come to the Lyric. I remember I'll come into the Lyric, but not just to see a movie. We would come here, and as we sat here in the balcony, we would actually throw water and popcorn down on the white kids that sat on the main floor. And then we would run out of here over to the Carver Theater, to the black theaters. So we always suggested that the segregationists made a mistake when they put us up top rather than at the bottom. Segregation and race relations at the time was at its height because everything under the sun was segregated. Downtown, all of the department stores, we could go in, black people could actually purchase, but they could not try items on before they made the purchase. They could purchase items, but they could not sit at a counter. If you bought a hot dog, you would buy it at the end of the counter, and you'd walk outside to eat the hot dog. Yeah. I tell my kids that, and they did not believe that that in fact was the case, but it really was. And that really set the tone for what race relations were like during that time. We were totally segregated. That is to suggest that everything from churches, schools, recreational activities, you name it, it was segregated. And that was, in fact, the law. It was basically both law and custom, because even after the law was changed, custom, it took quite a while for custom to really change. And today, I tell children about having to get on the back of the bus, having to sit behind the sign that designated colored in back and white in front. They simply cannot imagine that. Having to talk about coming here to the Lyric or any of the other businesses downtown and having to drink colored water versus white water. There's a white water fountain and a, in quote, colored water fountain. So you had to determine which one of those you were going to drink from. We didn't have to determine, it was already determined for us. We wondered what white water tastes like, so there were times when we would obviously, as children and mischievous, we would taste the white water and basically not taste any different, other than many times white water was cold water, colored water was not cold. White water was from a fountain that was probably cooled by electricity, whereas the black fountain was not. So everything here was segregated. Now, right across the street from the Lyric Theater, across 18th Street, is the Pythian Temple, where there were many black businesses. And then from the Pythian Temple on down 18th Street over to 4th Avenue, 5th Avenue, was the black business district. So we would leave the Lyric Theater many times running because we had thrown water down on the white kids, and we would run to 4th Avenue. And 4th Avenue was a bustling place at the time. So, you know, we were having fun, we thought. But now that I'm here and I can actually see this place, you know, it is it's a different place.
Why?
Well, because I'd never seen it from the vantage points that I've seen it today. And that is, I'd never been in the lobby of the Lyric Theater. Our lobby was actually the sidewalk. And then you come up the backside of the theater. So we never saw the glamorous part.
And how long would you stay in this theater?
Well, you know.
Just leave to come, you just came
Well, yeah, I you know, again, it's been more than 50 years, and I can't remember totally, but I know that there were times when we would simply come here, come upstairs, do our devilment, and then we'd run out. And I'm trying to think if there were times. No, we never got caught. Never got caught.
Do you know of anybody that did and what happened to them?
No, I don't know anybody that did. But if they did, I'm sure it wasn't nice, whatever happened. Because I can tell you some stories about the Birmingham Police. The Birmingham Police, when I went to Minneapolis, on the cars, it would always say, to protect and serve. Birmingham Police, as far as blacks were concerned, were not here to protect and serve us. I remember out in the southwestern section of town, there was a car number 51. And if you saw car number 51 coming and you were black, you would not remain on that corner. Black and young, you would not remain on that corner. There have been some horrific episodes out there. I remember in 1957, for instance, when Judge Aaron, a young black man, was actually accosted one night by Klansmen, it was stated. And he was actually beaten and he was castrated. And they were saying that it was because Reverend Shuttlesworth was attempting to desegregate the school system. And he said that the word was that any black person, if Shuttlesworth didn't stop what he was doing, this is what would happen to young black men if they are caught out. And the police department and the Klan, from our perspective, were synonymous. There was really no different. And it was terror at its worst where we were concerned. Yeah.
What was the significance of police car number 51?
Police car number 51, it was just a Birmingham police car, and it had, on the tags, of course, it had MUN, which meant a municipal car. But we always stated that that MUN meant murder you niggers. That's the way that we viewed it. From the black perspective, that's the way we viewed the police department, because they were not our friends.
What's segregation like today in Birmingham? Do you see it?
Well, segregation in the classic sense doesn't exist in Birmingham any longer, just as segregation in Birmingham now is like segregation would have been in Chicago or Minneapolis. It is not, it's de facto, not de jure. When I went to Minneapolis, for instance, I went to Chicago, I found as much or more segregation there than I did in Birmingham, but it was not de jure, it was not by law, it was simply by custom. Today, segregation here is by custom rather than by law. If you go to my church on Sunday, you may find a few white people, not very many at all. Probably count them on one hand. If you go to other churches that are white, you probably won't find anybody, maybe just a few black people. So, and if you go to certain neighborhoods, Birmingham now is about 75% African American. But if you go out.
Welcome to The Gavel, your weekly Denver City Council wrap-up. Here's what happened this week. On Monday, February 6th, during the Budget and Policy Committee, Community Planning and Development presented the 2023 work program on behalf of the administration. Later that day, the City Council passed a resolution approving a continuing agreement between the City and County of Denver and the community firm to continue administering the Emergency Rental Assistance Program to eligible households earning up to 80% of the area median income that were unable to pay rent during or due to the COVID-19 pandemic citywide. Community Planning and Development presented City Council 3 separate bills for consideration. Up first, an ordinance changing the zoning classification for 4350 Shoshone Street in Sunnyside. Secondly, for an ordinance changing the zoning classification for 1901 North Eudora Street in South Park Hill. Lastly, an ordinance amending the Denver Zoning Code, establishing the Cherry Creek East Mixed-Use Design Overlay Zone District and the Cherry Creek East Residential Design Overlay Zone District, and clarifying certain rules of measurement, and a bill for an ordinance changing the zoning classification for multiple properties to apply the Cherry Creek East Mixed-Use and Cherry Creek East Residential Design Overlays. All 3 bills passed unanimously. On Tuesday, February 7th, the Finance and Governance Committee were presented a lease agreement with Quebec Hospitality LLC, doing business as Comfort Inn. to provide 138 rooms as a non-congregate shelter for families experiencing homelessness during the COVID-19 pandemic, located at 4685 Quebec Street in Council District 8. The Department of Finance also presented a purchase and sale agreement with Lifespan Local LLC as part of the Rise Denver Bond Program for the city to purchase a 6,000 square foot condo unit to support a new Denver Public Library branch in the Westwood neighborhood located at 3300 Nevada Place in Council District 3. Both measures were passed on to the full council. On Wednesday, February 8th, the Safety, Housing, Education, and Homelessness Committee were presented with a council member-sponsored ordinance amending certain provisions of Chapter 2 concerning the Citizen Oversight Board. The Citizen Oversight Board consists of 9 community members who are broadly tasked with assessing the effectiveness of the Denver Department of Public Safety's hiring, training, and disciplinary processes and making recommendations as appropriate. The board is also responsible for appointing, by and with the consent of the City Council, the independent monitor who shall serve at the pleasure of the board.
Thank you. Good morning, all. My name is Elizabeth Bettis Castle, and I am your new Denver Independent Monitor. My goal is to continue the great work that has been done so far by the Office of the Independent Monitor. This agency has done tremendous work for the city of Denver, for the community of Denver. My mission is to bridge the gap between law enforcement and the community through transparency and a continued accountability, to increase the trust that needs to happen between our community and that of law enforcement.
The ordinance amendment will move on to City Council. Denver City Council meets every Monday at 3:30 at the City and County Building Council Chambers, or tune in live on Denver 8 or Zoom. Want more info on City Council, including weekly schedules, agendas, and archived recordings? Join this Denver City Council mailing list by texting CC Schedule to 22828 or visit denvergov.org/City Council. Be sure to follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube for Denver news, events, and information.
Great. How are you? It's so good to see you. Thank you for being here.
I'm honored to be here as mayor and congratulate you, Ray, and welcome you to Denver, Colorado. Thank you for choosing our city.
The system will automatically track the tumor.
This is a very important moment in our city whenever we're able to pull companies like ViewRay to Denver, to Colorado, which join the pool of med tech companies along the Front Range.
And the MRI controls the beam on and off to account for any motion or body changes in the patient.
More personalized medicine, fewer negative side effects. That is exactly what we're driving at ViewRay in the radiation oncology, radiation therapy space.
If the tumor is outside of the ideal position, the beam will turn off.
The MRI controls the radiation beam. So whether you're talking about the hardest to treat cancers and keeping patients alive, or dramatically impacting the life of somebody with breast or prostate cancer, this system that Dr. Dempsey invented is just miraculous. It is Star Trek kind of therapy. It makes it virtually impossible for the radiation beam to miss.
You've grown over 50 employees now, but you share our values. And what those values are that we saw in ViewRay are the values of diversity and inclusion, very diverse workforce. But I was also extremely impressed to read about the fact that half of your board of directors are women. And that says an awful lot to me.
We looked at great places to live, work, educate families, kids. Where can we hire all of these software engineers and quality engineers, and where can we put a manufacturing location? And all of those analytics, no surprise to you guys, Colorado pops out on the map. That companies aren't made of brick and mortar. They're made of people and ideas. Crazy ideas like curing cancer.
Is companies like ViewRay are not just Colorado or national companies. We know that you're going to play globally. And my job as mayor and the next mayor and the governor and the next governor is to make sure that you're able to transact that business very conveniently, affordably, and feasibly across the waters. And so we'll continue to focus on making Denver that destination, that global destination to do business, as well as to be able to move your products and your people around the world. And so we're proud to have the third busiest airport in the world to help you do that.
3, 2, 1, go. There we go.
So congratulations, Alex Adele, you and your partners for coming in to the airport. Several years ago, Dan completed a strategic plan, and the objective was to bring more of our local brands into the airport, to become kind of global brands. As you walk through the airport, you get a chance to see what we as Denverites get to celebrate every day. And today, we celebrate a local brand that we all enjoy in downtown Denver and around our great city in Mercantile. The Mercantile is a place that I enjoy dining at Union Station, and now I can come and dine here at Denver National Airport.
To get to this point and be able to represent Denver, not only in Denver International Airport, but also down at Union Station, what I would consider the two best places to be to represent Denver. I am thoroughly excited about the opportunity and so gracious.
This is an active site right here, the line, people getting food. And so as we continue to welcome more and more passengers here at Denver International Airport and prepare for 100 million passengers, we want to make sure they have a positive experience.
This is exactly what we want to do. Not only bring in local brands, but to lift up our local minority disadvantaged businesses and their opportunities here at DEN. These efforts create jobs. These efforts give us a chance to give our passengers an experience that we're proud to showcase, no matter where they come from around the world. This agreement, I believe, is a good deal for our residents. It continues the long-standing commitment of accountability, transparency, and partnership between the city and Denver Health to benefit all of our residents. And it takes new steps to ensure that anyone in need of these services, no matter where they are, when they call for help, they will continue to receive the best possible medical care that we can provide them and save lives. Because that's the most important thing.
I like to emphasize the fact that Denver Health is accountable to the city. It's also accountable to our citizens, and that we believe that as we move forward, enhanced transparency around what we do and how we collectively respond to emergencies in particular is going to be important. We have a goal to continue to improve response times, no matter who is responding, and to make sure that the distribution of this response team meets the needs of our citizens. So under this new agreement, there will be a second medical director added to the emergency medical response system. So 2 medical directors, one at Denver Health and one at the fire department. And in the spirit of collaboration, we will jointly select those medical directors. Our fire department personnel who now get trained in BLS and ALS will see enhanced training to support that. However, our Denver Health paramedics will continue to be the lead paramedics at the scene. And in addition, we made clear that the transport of patients is a responsibility, the sole responsibility of Denver Health.
Denver Health and the paramedics may be, like a lot of other agencies and services, stretched with staff and resources covering a growing city. We're growing massively out there, but they are very committed. What our fire department, and what I want the people to know, is the fire department of the city and county of Denver said we are partners with the paramedics. We want to help as best we can while we're on the scene. Oftentimes we're first to arrive. Give us the ability to help people instead of standing around waiting. And I think this new agreement that we have, where there are 2 medical directors, where our fire department members are trained to provide not only basic but advanced life support while on the scene under the direction of a medical director, will make a difference. And then when the paramedics arrive, they become the lead on the ground.
One of the things that we're observing is that we often have to hire people into jobs at actually a higher salary than somebody that's got experience, and that's not right. So our desire is to keep people, continue to see them be paid a living wage, and to be able to also train them and get them to move up the ladder. Any employee who leaves breaks my heart, because we've invested time training them and getting them part of the team.
And we don't have as much of an issue attracting people, but we need to do a better job of making sure that we keep the people that we have. That is our most valuable resource, and making sure that they feel valued and appreciated. Obviously, as we continue to grow and approach things differently, we will have to take a step back to look at the parameters of the types of people that we're hiring and what certifications they have currently in place.
As we summarize this is let's say a $70 million agreement between Denver Health and the city of Denver. There are, as Donna pointed out, 35 different sections in this agreement that you should look at, because this is just one of the areas that we work to make an improvement. There are greater delineations in terms of roles and responsibilities under public health, as well as more coordination, stricter coordination with services in our jails, with the Sheriff's Department and Denver Health. And again, trying to tighten up and to improve those operations. We went into this wanting to improve services to the people of Denver, whether they are being met on the street, or we're dealing with them in detention facilities, or how we further coordinate around public health.
I'm excited for what we're going to be doing for our city going forward. I'm excited for the partnerships. I'm excited for how our citizens will be identified in a different way. The people of Denver will be identified, so that we can isolate those areas and make sure that everybody is getting equal response coverage.
This is important. It's important. It's something I've worked on since I was a city council member. You acknowledged that. And I'm glad we've arrived at this moment, because I think it's a partnership that ultimately will benefit the people of Denver. The arts are one of the hallmarks of our great city, and their benefits, while often intangible, are intrinsic. And I can tell you, as someone who's had to market and sell this city all over the world, there is not a sale package that goes forward without talking about our commitment to the arts and culture. Because we recognize that they remind us of our shared humanity, they connect us, they inspire us, they build us up, they keep us hopeful in very difficult times. They drive us to make this world better. Arts and culture and creativity help us to process and heal in challenging times. I will never forget that the true champion of the COVID experience for all of us over the last 3 years really are the arts and culture. I want you to reflect back on how you survived it. And I promise you, somewhere along that journey, arts and culture played a role. Whether you turned on a play that you hadn't had a chance to see. Some of us caught Hamilton for the first time on television. So through art and culture, the creativity, the imaginations that we have give us hope for the future. Art and culture help us to celebrate successes and express joy in communities. Today's honorees, we get to celebrate this moment and thank them for their contribution to our culture and our heart, being the heart of our city.
We've got some exciting news regarding our Center of Equity and Excellence in Aviation, also known as CIA. The space is literally right above us. It's the first of its kind in this country to create a pipeline of aviation talent here in Denver and the Rocky Mountain region. It's going to provide underrepresented young people an opportunity to start a career in aviation. This first is the Hall of Equity. This will be the focal point of SIA.
I remember the conversations where I talked about training the next generation of aviation workers. How do we prepare people who've never been concessionaires to be concessionaires? It's one thing to say we want to draw on our local talent and local business people and entrepreneurs. It's another thing to prepare them for the dynamics and really the burdens and opportunities that come into this airport and be competitive. It's one thing to say we want young people, particularly in this era where we are as a nation in a lot of trouble in terms of the talent pool for pilots to get ready to come and compete to be pilots. And yet another thing to say we're going to begin to create the opportunity for them to train, to be in the aviation industry, and hopefully to be pilots, to pursue that dream. And to also reach into communities that never imagined that they could be pilots or mechanical engineers or civil engineers or construction engineers right here in Denver International Airport.
This level will focus on exposing high school kids and younger kids and college-age kids to careers in aviation through hands-on practical experiences.
And so when Phil says we want to be the Silicon Valley of training the next professionals of aviation here at the Center of Equity and Excellence, some of us might chuckle. But this could become the center where the pitter-patter of opportunities become the strides of excellence and the strides of dreams right here in this building.
This pre-function space will provide space for SIA students and guests to network, make business connections.
We get to see from the construction what it means for underrepresented, underutilized institutions and individuals rise up and say, I can do this. We're seeing it from the beginning.
This last rendering shows the lobby area that will have a cafe. The mayor said, you know, we should have a concession training area where upstart or new concession businesses can be in that space learning how to be a concession and actually make money in that space as they're learning.
There's no need to wait for getting involved and engaging with SIA. These programs have been happening and are already happening now, right? So we want to continue to grow that. We have a Business Development Training Academy, or BDTA. We have Career Pathways, a 5-tier program that matriculates all the way up to executive level leadership. And we have a Research and Innovation Lab that we're implementing program on.
This center is a groundbreaking concept that will change the way Denver International Airport does business. It will create economic development opportunities, fuel jobs, and provide benefits to our entire community. For example, those in underserved community will have a chance to start a career in aviation. And one reason why I'm so passionate about this is a rich industry with a lot of opportunities. And a lot of firms, including our small and minority firms, will have a chance to develop and grow into large companies. The opportunities are endless, and I can't wait to see what the vision of this building looks like, but it will ultimately be about the people that go into this building to learn and prepare to thrive.
For the land of the free.
And it dawned on me that so many people who are here today are probably here for the first time. Many of us have shown up. I've thought about it for about 30 years. I know it's 38, but 30 years I've been coming.
Every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring.
Before I was a gleam in a voter's eye to be a councilman, before I decided to run for mayor, I was with my brothers and sisters spending the night at the Permit Center. Because when Dr. King's birthday would roll around at the strike of midnight, we had to make sure that we were ahead of the Klan to get the permit so that we could march, so that we could be at the Civic Center in the state capitol without counter protest.
As we remember the life of the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., we thank you that we are here not just to celebrate a perfect human being, he was not that, but one who was courageous enough to try to do what was right, even when the path forward was unclear.
That as we show up here today, we are a reflection of Dr. King's dream.
We need you to grant us the strength that extends far beyond natural human ability. We need you to help us to forgive, to choose love over hate.
Since December 1, the values of Dr. King. In 30 days, 4,282 people came to this city from Venezuela. They needed love. This city, many of you showed up, are the reflection of Dr. King, and simply said, we got you. Thank you, Denver, for standing up, for making a difference. All right, let's march on. The true calling for all of us today is to show up and be a reflection of Dr. King's dream.
We don't come here just to celebrate King. We come here to act like King. We come here to be on the forefront of action like King. This is hypocritical if you just come out here, sing happy birthday and leave. You could do that at home.
As Wellington Webb said so beautifully, it's not enough just to show up here with a sign. It's not enough to show up here and sing a few songs. We've got to work every day because, see, there's still attacks on the LGBTQ community. There's still attacks on the Jewish community. We've got Asian neighbors who don't want to come outside for fear of being targeted. Black men are still over-incarcerated. Black men and women are still underpaid.
And the home of the brave.
We've got work to do. And ultimately, God had to remove Dr. King so that each of us could understand that we have a responsibility now to pick up the baton, to carry on the dream, and that it takes each and every one of us as a village to spend the night at the Permit Center to make sure that we're a reflection of his dream. God bless you all.
Let us march on till victory is won.
Let's walk for love that feels good. Y'all ready?
That's right.
Let's go.
We started this entire process together.
Yeah, that's right.
years ago,
About
maybe?
15 years ago. It just feels like that day 15 years ago where we decided we would collaborate on this very important objective. And I'm so glad that I got my dear friend here to continue the journey.
When the center opened, it was just a dream come true.
I think the power of this is that the tragedies that occur as a result of domestic violence are preventable. And what we're here to do today is to raise the flag and hopefully increase awareness that there are services for people who are being victimized today. This is important for all of us. It's going to take the entire community.
October 22nd will be my 14-year escape anniversary. If you had told me 14 years ago that I would be standing here today with support from the city and county of Denver officials, I would tell you you're darn right because I'm just that strong.
I survived. I left with probably $20 in my pocket, slept on a cousin's couch. So I know what hard times are. And I know what it feels like not to know what to do, not to have hope. So this is why we have the center. The center, it carries my name, but many of you have heard me say it's not about me. It's about all of you. It's about all of those individuals who are suffering today.
I noticed as we walked, it was kind of quiet and solemn. We only do that when someone else has the power. The abuser doesn't have the power.
We're the survivors. So we can make some noise today. We can celebrate on behalf of those who are not here. My beloved sister, Karen, in 2002, unfortunately, I was there with my hand on her shoulder when she took her last breath, after my twin sister discovered her having been victim of a gunshot to the head. This is a personal issue for me because the person who shot and murdered my sister and brought unspeakable pain to her children and to the rest of the family was someone who was supposed to love her. I promised her that day that I would never stop fighting for victims and doing everything we could to remind victims to don't wait, to say something.
I forgot the six-pack. I'll be right back. It's not like it's a crime, right?
Your excuses will never be as good as their reasons. No plates, no placard, no parking.
Observe a domesticated human family in their natural habitat, known to their species as the backyard.
Hey, you think I should light it now?
I think it's good.
Yeah?
Oh dear, someone is about to burn a pile of debris that's too tall, which can start a wildfire. Wait, could it be? Blimey, it is.
It's Smokey.
It's Smokey Bear. What a legend.
Hey, it's Smokey. Sorry, it was too high. Right.
Watch as he astutely ensures that there's no wind, and how he removes some of the debris to create a smaller, safer burning pile.
No, you said make it bigger, baby. The bigger the better.
Take note of our fearless furry friend here, humans.
I appreciate it. Fist bump.
Watching you.
Smokey's done it again.
Bye, Smokey.
Only you can prevent wildfires.
President, as one who has taken some interest in the election of presidents, I want to congratulate you on your election to this high office. Mr. Secretary General, delegates to the United Nations, ladies and gentlemen, we meet again in the quest for peace. 24 months ago, when I last had the honor of addressing this body, the shadow of fear lay darkly across the world. The freedom of West Berlin, wars in immediate peril, agreement on a neutral Laos seemed remote. The mandate of the United Nations in the Congo was under fire. Hold back the darkness. Today the clouds have lifted a little so that new rays of hope can break through. The pressures on West Berlin appear to be temporarily eased. Political unity in the Congo has been largely restored. A neutral coalition in Laos, while still in difficulty, is at least in being. The integrity of the United Nations Secretariat has been reaffirmed. A United Nations decade of development is underway. And for the first time in 17 years of effort, a specific step has been taken to limit the nuclear arms race. I refer, of course, to the treaty to ban nuclear tests in the atmosphere, outer space, and underwater, concluded by the Soviet Union, the United Kingdom, and the United States, and already signed by nearly 100 countries. It has been hailed by people the world over who are thankful to be free from the fears of nuclear fallout. And I am confident that on next Tuesday at 10:30 o'clock in the morning, it will receive the overwhelming endorsement of the Senate of the United States. The world has not escaped from the darkness. The long shadows of conflict and crisis envelop us still. But we meet today in an atmosphere of rising hope and at a moment of comparative calm. My presence here today is not a sign of crisis, but of confidence. I am not here to report on a new threat to the peace or new signs of war. I have come to salute the United Nations and to show the support of the American people for your daily deliberations. For the value of this body's weapon, the reduction of global tension must not be an excuse for the narrow pursuit of self-interest. If the Soviet Union and the United States, with all of their global interests and clashing commitments of ideology, and with nuclear weapons still aimed at each other today, can find areas of common interest and agreement, then surely other nations can do the same. Nations caught in regional conflicts, in racial issues, or in the death throes of old colonialism. Chronic disputes which divert precious resources from the needs of the people or drain the energies of both sides serve the interests of no one. And the badge of responsibility in the modern world is a willingness to seek peaceful solutions. It is never too early to try, and it's never too late to talk. And the United States, as a major nuclear power, does have a special responsibility to the world. It is, in fact, a threefold responsibility. A responsibility to our own citizens, a responsibility to the people of the whole world who are affected by our decisions, and to the next generation of humanity. We believe the Soviet Union also has these special responsibilities, and that those responsibilities require our two nations to concentrate less on our differences and more on the means of resolving them peacefully. For too long, both of us have increased our military budgets, our nuclear stockpiles, and our capacity to destroy all life on this hemisphere, human, animal, vegetable, without any corresponding increase in our security. Our conflicts, to be sure, are real. Our concepts of the world are different. No service is performed by failing to make clear our disagreements. A central difference is the belief of the American people in self-determination for all people. We believe that the people of Germany and Berlin must be free to reunite their capital and their country. We believe that the people of Cuba must be free to secure the fruits of the revolution that have been betrayed from within and exploited from without. Protection of freedom. And our determination to safeguard that freedom will measure up to any threat or challenge. But I would say to the leaders of the Soviet Union and to their people that if either of our countries is to be fully secure, we need a much better weapon than the H-bomb, a weapon better than ballistic missiles or nuclear submarines, and that better weapon is peaceful cooperation. We have in recent years agreed on a limited test ban treaty, on an emergency communications link between our capitals, on a statement of principles for disarmament, on an increase in cultural exchange, on cooperation in outer space, on the peaceful exploration of the Antarctic, and on tempering last year's crisis over Cuba. I believe, therefore, that the Soviet Union and the United States, together with their allies, can achieve further agreements, agreements which spring from our mutual interest in avoiding mutual destruction. There can be no doubt about the agenda of further steps. We must continue to seek agreements on measures which prevent war by accident or miscalculation. We must continue to seek agreement on safeguards against surprise attack, including observation posts at key points. We must continue to seek agreement on further measures to curb the nuclear arms race by controlling the transfer of nuclear weapons, converting fissionable materials to peaceful purposes, and banning underground testing with adequate inspection and enforcement. We must continue to seek agreement on a freer flow of information and people from east to west and west to east. We must continue to seek agreement, encouraged by yesterday's affirmative response to this proposal by the Soviet foreign minister on an arrangement to keep weapons of mass destruction out of outer space. Let us get our negotiators back to the negotiating table to work out a practicable arrangement to this end. Purposes. Finally, in a field where the United States and the Soviet Union have a special capacity, in the field of space, there is room for new cooperation, for further joint efforts in the regulation and exploration of space. I include among these possibilities a joint expedition to the moon. Space offers no problems of sovereignty. By resolution of this assembly, the members of the United Nations have forsworn any claim to territorial rights in outer space or on celestial bodies, and declared that international law and the United Nations Charter will apply. Why, therefore, should man's first flight to the moon be a matter of national competition? Why should the United States and the Soviet Union, in preparing for such expeditions, become involved in immense duplications of research, construction, and expenditure? Surely we should explore whether the scientists and astronauts of our two countries, and that freedom is more enduring than coercion. And in the contest for a better life, all the world can be a winner. The effort to improve the conditions of man, however, is not a task for the few. It is the task of all nations, acting alone, acting in groups, acting in the United Nations. For plague and pestilence and plunder and pollution, the hazards of nature and the hunger of children are the foes of every nation. Has man had such capacity to control his own environment, to end thirst and hunger, to conquer poverty and disease, to banish illiteracy and massive human misery? We have the power to make this the best generation of mankind in the history of the world, or to make it the last. The provision of development assistance by individual nations must go on, but the United Nations also must play a larger role in helping bring to all men the fruits of modern science and industry. A United Nations conference on this subject, held earlier this year at Geneva, opened new vistas for the developing countries. Next year, a United Nations conference on trade will consider the needs of these nations for new markets. And more than 4/5 of the entire United Nations system can be found today mobilizing the weapons of science and technology for the United Nations decade of development. But more can be done. A World Center for Health Communications under the World Health Organization
could warn of epidemics and the adverse effects of certain drugs, as well as transmit the results of new experiments and new discoveries. Regional research centers could advance our common medical knowledge and train new scientists and doctors for new nations. A global system of satellites could provide communication and weather information for all corners of the earth. A worldwide program of conservation could protect the forest and wild game preserves now in danger of extinction for all time, improve the marine harvest of food from our oceans, and prevent the contamination of air and water by industrial as well as nuclear pollution. And finally, a worldwide program of farm productivity and food distribution, similar to our country's Food for Peace program, could now give every child the food he needs. New efforts are needed. If this Assembly's Declaration of Human Rights, now 15 years old, is to have full meaning, and new means should be found for promoting the free expression and trade of ideas through travel and communication and through increased exchanges of people and books and broadcasts. For as the world renounces the competition of weapons, competition in ideas must flourish, and that competition must be as full and as fair as possible. The United States delegation will be prepared to suggest to the United Nations initiatives in the pursuit of all these goals. For this is an organization for peace, and peace cannot come without work and without progress. The peacekeeping record of the United Nations has been a proud one, though its tasks are always formidable. We are fortunate to have the skills of our distinguished Secretary General and the brave efforts of those who have been serving the cause of peace in the Congo and the Middle East, in Korea and Kashmir, in West New Guinea and Malaysia. But what the United Nations has done in the past is less important than the tasks for the future. We cannot take its peacekeeping machinery for granted. That machinery must be soundly financed, which it cannot be if some members are allowed to prevent it from meeting its obligations by failing to meet their own. The United Nations must be supported by all those who exercise their franchise here, and its operations must be backed to the end. Too often a project... I also hope that the recent initiative of several members in preparing standby peace forces for United Nations call will encourage similar commitments by others. This nation remains ready to provide logistic and other material support. Policing, moreover, is not enough without provision for Pacific settlement. We should increase the resort to special missions of fact-finding and conciliation, make greater use of the International Court of Justice, and accelerate the work of the International Law Commission. The United Nations cannot survive as a static organization. Its obligations are increasing, as well as its size. Its charter must be changed, as well as its customs. The authors of that charter did not intend that it be frozen in perpetuity. The science of weapons and war has made us all, far more than 18 years ago in San Francisco, one world and one human race with one common destiny. In such a world, absolute sovereignty no longer assures us of absolute security. The conventions of peace must pull abreast and then ahead of the inventions of war. The United Nations, building on its successes and learning from its failures, must be developed into a genuine world security system. But peace does not rest. 2 years ago, I told this body that the United States had proposed and was willing to sign a limited test ban treaty. Today, that treaty has been signed. It will not put an end to war. It will not remove basic conflicts. It will not secure freedom for all, but it can be a lever. And Archimedes, in explaining the principles of the lever, was said to have declared to his friends, "Give me a place where I can stand, and I shall move the world." My fellow inhabitants of this planet, let us take our stand here in this assembly of nations, and let us see that if we, in our own time, can move the world to a just and lasting peace,
So I'm grateful that I have such a beautiful family. Both my parents, they have supported me, they always stand with me. And for them, I'm just their daughter. Just like as for other parents, they have a daughter, they love her, they take care of her. But then I have two younger brothers, and as usual, brothers, they're cheeky, we still fight, we still argue. And my brothers, they don't care what awards I'm winning outside and who I am, and if I'm an ambassador of something or UN Messenger of Peace. So when I won the Nobel Peace Prize and I came back to the hotel where we were staying, and my little brother started saying that, "Look, you have won the Nobel Peace Prize, but it does not mean you become a bossy sister." So I always wanted to get quality education, to go to a good university, and it was my dream, and now that dream has come true that I'm going to Oxford. I really worked hard for it, and I was so happy when I received the offer, and I'm excited to meet new people, to make friends, to learn. It is a great place of learning. The goal of this mission is to empower local leaders and local activists. So we want to increase that investment and also support local advocates as well, local girl advocates. So for that we have announced $3 million, and we want to expand that group, redouble our efforts, and make sure we can reach to as many local activists as we can, because they are the real change makers in their community, and when we empower them, through them we can bring change. It also includes e-learning and other improvements in the quality of education. So it is a vast project. It covers many areas, but our main goal is to empower local leaders. So this year I went on a Girl Power trip, and I went to America, Canada, then Nigeria, Iraq, and Mexico. And in these places I met amazing and incredible girls, and I heard their inspiring stories. In Iraq I met a girl called Najla, and she was 14 years old when she was wearing her wedding dress, and she took off her high heels and she escaped from her wedding. She ran away, and later on her village was captured by the extremists, ISIS, and she was actually attacked, but she did not stop, and she's still continuing her education. She's speaking out, she has survived, and she resisted all that she went through, and the things that we cannot imagine for a second. She has gone through all that, but she's still fighting for education, and she wants to be a journalist. So these are the stories that inspire me, but my aim is to bring these stories then to a global platform like the UN, and allow these girls to meet their country leaders, their local leaders, so that their voices can be raised. I'm just reminding them of their responsibilities, that they are holding the positions in which they are responsible for their people and for the future generation. And I remind them that they have to increase investment towards towards schooling, towards quality education. Otherwise, we will lose this future generation. This will impact not just the children, not just the girls, but all of us. So we have to invest those 130 million girls who are out of school. We have to support them. We have to stand with them, make changes in the law, and also take action. So I think men, they have to do a lot. And my father is an inspiration because his 5 sisters could not go to school. So he decided that he would allow his own daughter to go to school to get her education and then to raise her voice. When we started campaigning in Swat Valley, when terrorism started and girls' education was banned, there were many other girls who wanted to speak out, but their parents, their brothers did not allow them. My father was the one who did not stop me. We have to believe in girls, we have to believe in our sisters, in our daughters, and allow them to be who they want to be. As my father says, that you do not have to do something, just do not clip their wings. And if you do not clip their wings, just let them fly and let them achieve their dreams. So men have to come forward, they have to support women, and it's better for the whole economy, it's better for each and every one of us. It will help the economy to grow even faster, it will improve the standards of living of each and every one of us, it will improve health, and it also benefits the children, because when women are educated, they are more likely to take care of their children and their education and their future. So I have seen a lot in my life, from terrorism, extremism, to then being attacked, and I was at a point where I had to make a decision whether I want to continue my campaign for girls' education or not. And I think I have been away from my home in Pakistan for a long time, and so going through all this situation in my life, I have learned that now surviving that attack, this life is for a purpose, and that is for the education of children. So it's only 70-80 years that we live for, and why not live it for a good purpose? Why not live it for a service that can help humanity, that can help the world? So I want to help as many girls as I can to make sure that they get quality education and achieve their dreams.
I believe deeply that there's a lot more that connects us than that divides us. And I think it's a really important value for me to try to listen both to what people say, but also to listen past their words to try to understand what they mean. I think one of the most important things a leader can do is both share a vision, but include people in being able to have access to help improve, shape, and participate in that vision. Inevitably in life, we're going to face challenges. So the first thing that I would say is make sure you are dedicated to your own improvement, and work hard at being the best that you can be, because that will always help you be better in facing difficult times. The second thing I would say is work on, at least for me, I needed to work on my confidence around that, particularly when there are big challenges. It can feel like it's impossible. I myself can get plagued with beliefs like, I don't know how to do this, I've never done this, I can't do this. If you've done your work on being the best that you can be, for me it was really important to build my confidence, that I could pull on that to help myself as I faced big challenges. And then the third thing I would say is, none of us do this alone. And the more we can build the strength of the team in facing tough challenges, the better off we're going to be. I would definitely say to other people, you just have to be kind to yourself and you know, I probably have more laundry that needs to be washed than I would like to admit. But you just have to be kind to yourself while you're trying to balance and juggle.
Because my parents told me I have to be responsible.
Because my first coach told me, you can do this.
Because my teacher helped me see the choices.
Because my coach treated me like everybody else.
Because my boss showed me how to do a good job.
Because a mentor believed in my potential.
Is why I am where I am today.
I'm swimming faster than I ever dreamed I could.
I discovered that I could work as an artist.
I led my high school team to 2 championships.
I am a valuable employee.
I have a career that I am passionate about.
I will be whatever I want to be.
What can you do?
What can you do?
Like all young people, youth with disabilities should grow up expecting to work and succeed. For more information, visit whatcanyoudocampaign.org.
Make some noise!
I am a nurse,
A firefighter, a college student,
a mother, and I am an American soldier.
I will always be ready
for every storm and disaster that threatens my community. I will always be there to protect my neighbors,
my family,
and my country.
We are the Army National Guard.
We are the Army National Guard.
We are the Army National Guard.
Visit nationalguard.com to learn more about part-time service.
1 in 3 adults has pre-diabetes. That means it could be you, your dog walker,
On your left.
your cat jogger. With early diagnosis, prediabetes can be reversed. Take the risk test at doihaveprediabetes.org.
My name is Randy Hampton, Public Information Officer for the Northwest region of Colorado Parks and Wildlife. Want to welcome you to this webinar this evening. My job is to make sure kind of the technology works correctly on the back end of things. So you don't want to hear from me much, but I'm going to turn it over to some of the folks that you are going to hear from tonight that are going to help you understand a little bit more about turkey hunting in Colorado. And let's kick it over to Brian Posthumus from CPW. Brian, go ahead whenever you're ready, and I'll let you introduce yourself.
Great. Thanks, Randy. My name is Brian Posthumus. I'm the statewide hunter outreach coordinator for Colorado Parks and Wildlife. Yeah, we'll be talking a little bit here. I'm going to pass it on next to Pepper.
Pepper Canterbury from the Colorado Parks and Wildlife. I'm the Northeast Region Hunting and Angling Outreach Coordinator.
Awesome. Thanks, Pepper. We're very fortunate to be joined by lots of other folks from Colorado Parks and Wildlife, including Tracy Predmore. Tracy, tell us where you're from and what you do.
Hi, I'm Tracy Predmore. I'm the Southeast Region Education Coordinator. So I handle the hunter outreach in the Southeast portion of Colorado.
Hi everyone, I am Kathy Braun, Southwest Region Education and Volunteer Coordinator based out of Durango. Pass it to Kathleen.
I am Kathleen, the Education Coordinator for the Northwest Region of Parks and Wildlife, and I cover the Hunter Outreach program. And I'm going to actually introduce our partners for tonight. So I am going to pass it to Elena and Jamie.
Hi, everybody. I just want to start off by saying thank you for joining us. Turkey hunting is both a passion for both Jamie and I. Kind of is what got us started into hunting. So I was just going to say we have 5 Onyx subscriptions. If you don't know what Onyx is, it's a map app for hunters, and you can track where you're going. You can download maps. You can see private, public land. So we're going to do 5 trivia questions at the end of tonight's session. And the first person to answer it correctly, you'll be able to type in your answer in the Q&A section. So the first one to answer it correctly will win an Onyx card. So that's really exciting, an Onyx subscription. So yeah, I'm going to pass it off to Jamie, and excited to learn more about turkey hunting with you all.
I forgot to mention that they are the Rocky Mountain Sportswomen group.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry about that, guys.
I guess I forgot to mention it too. No, we're I'll let Jamie talk about that though. We'll get her going.
Yes. So can everybody hear me? I never do this right. I am the co-founder of Rocky Mountain Sportswomen. We're a nonprofit organization based out of Steamboat Springs, Colorado. And we are just striving to create a network of women who love just being in the outdoors. We do a lot of different events online and in person. So if you go onto our website, RockyMountainSportswomen.com, you can go to our events page and see everything that we have happening. Be sure to sign up for our newsletter and you'll be notified of any future events. We do lots of different things, from fly fishing to archery to turkey hunting, our favorite, and duck hunting, all sorts of things. So check it out, sign up for the email list and you'll be notified of future stuff. Also on the note of the Onyx cards, I can't imagine hunting here in Colorado without them. It's pretty amazing. You can do a lot of e-scouting and all sorts of different stuff on Onyx. So definitely worth sticking around for. It's a pretty cool subscription. So I'll hand it back to Kathleen. And
sorry. And then we have a couple of announcements too that we'll announce at the end too, as far as a future event and a couple other things for you guys too. So yeah, we'll pass it on to Kathleen and we'll get started.
Okay, thanks guys. And then Randy, I think we are set up so that if you guys at any point during the discussion tonight, you have a question, that's what they're running in the background to answer questions. If any of it is for the good of the group, we'll try to cover it, but make sure you go ahead and type in those questions as we go, so we don't get too far ahead if you need some clarification. So welcome again. I'm actually going to start with a little bit of biology for the turkeys here in Colorado. So my challenge is to share my screen with you. So I'm gonna attempt, to share my screen. Okay. So for Colorado, welcome. We are talking about turkeys here in Colorado, and I'm not gonna read every slide and I'm gonna go fairly fast for time's sake, but just know here in Colorado, of the species across the United States, we actually have Rio Grande and Merriam's here in Colorado. For you to be able to hunt. If you ever hear hunters say they got a grand slam, they actually got all the subspecies. And we are fortunate to have 2 here in Colorado. So that's kind of the layout. The Merriam's are in green and the Rio Grande come in from the east of Colorado. So the Merriam's here in Colorado, one of the bigger things to note on them, they have a lot of white feathers at their back and on the tips of their tail, and they're very white compared to some of the other species, primarily in the western mountain regions of the United States. And that's just another layout of how we have them here in Colorado. You can get a few hybrids, but that's it. The Rio Grandes actually, they have longer legs compared to other species. Hard to tell when they're on the ground, but they actually on the tips of their tail, that's a bit buffier. It's not as white as your Merriams have. Your Merriams are very white on that back. And that's them kind of moving in. You'll see that Utah's got some close to Grand Junction. So we actually have them they do come up the Colorado River for us. But those are your two subspecies. Just a little bit of nomenclature before we get going and start chatting about these birds without you knowing what we're talking about. But a male is a tom or gobbler. That's an adult male. A female is a hen. A young male is a jake. So shorter beard, younger bird. And then the young of the year are actually called poults. So both male and female have a button spur. Typically the males will grow into a bigger spur, which becomes a trophy a lot of people like. Toms grow the beards that are modified feathers. They don't molt throughout their life. And so when you hear of a really good heavy tom, he usually has a very long beard on him. Our hens actually though can also have a beard, which is almost 20% of the hens could have a beard. Male characteristics that we talk about, the tail feathers on that fan, those wings that they use, they'll actually strut around and drag them on the ground. They make a really good, strong sound. Spurs, but not necessary on all toms. I've seen some huge beards on some toms with 0 spurs. The beard, and then the gobbler part, which is that red, white, and blue head. These spurs are kind of typical of it growing out to that longer one where you hear somebody say, I can hang it on a tree. That's a really big spur. But they don't actually always have that. And sometimes they have a spectacular beard. So that's just the beard, a side view on a tom with a beard. The gobblers have that iridescent coloring. Their feathers are gorgeous when you can catch the sun on them. Lots of people who fly fish covet those feathers to tie flies, but they're very gorgeous birds. And red, white, and blue head is what to look for. We'll talk about this in safety later, but red, white, and blue is not what to wear in the woods when you're hunting, because that's what you're looking for on these guys. The more excited that male gets, the more white his head actually turns. But you are looking for the red, white, and blue of a male. A hen won't have that. And then gives you a good aim sight at the base of the neck when you can see all that color. This is just the basics, or the best part of this slide is to show that solid tail. An adult mature gobbler has a tail that's even. That rainbow on the top has an is even in length. So occasionally there's a feather missing, but typically an adult bird is going to have